Hey guys, how are you all? Welcome to Let's Start Story on What If Naruto Was Abandoned by Crimson Knightmare in Naruto X Euphemia Part 1. So do 4 blue hearts comment. Be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video, and please share with your friends and watch till end. Also check out Patreon, for I have upload Naruto X Rias and Akino uncensored spicy version, link in description. Rubble, that is all that is left, all that anyone can make out, of the landscape that was once one of the proud cities of Japan, or as it is now called Area 11, aft. The initial invasion by the Holy Britannian Empire in 2010. But that battle is more than 7 years old now, and soon this place would be better known for another entirely different reason. At the center of the ruins stood a single nightmare frame, but this nightmare frame was one of a kind. It was humanoid-shaped, with most of its armor being a dark crimson color with black lining its shoulders, the bottom of its feet, chest, and along its knee guards. Its head had fox attributes to it, with its eyes being a solid orange. But the most prominent feature on the nightmare that made it so unique were the 9 tails that swayed behind it, and even though they were made of metal, they moved with such elegance that they never even came close to colliding with one another. Inside the pilot W, as a young boy of about 16 with a black mask on that hid most of his facial features. He had spiky golden blonde hair that fell around his face. Through his face mask you could see a shining pair of sky blue eyes. If one were to look under his mask, they would see 6 strange marks that almost looked like whiskers, 3 on each cheek. The clothes he wore were something only he would know the meaning of. His name is Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze. And right now he was in some serious trouble. How did it come to this? The blonde boy thought to himself. This place, these ruins, they were meant to be his grave site. Looking around him, the boy saw that he was being surrounded by, at the very least, 60 Burai, the Japanese modified Glasgows. From what he could see alone, all their guns trained on him. Some could say it spoke highly of his piloting skills, that so many people were needed, just him. But considering that not too long ago he considered these people his comrades, allies, nakama, his friends, he really couldn't find any reason to be proud of any of this. Exactly how many times did he risk his life to save theirs? Only to be betrayed by them at the end. While he was never an official member of the Black Knights, he had, on more than one occasion, fought alongside them, protecting the people of Area 11, no matter who they were, and against the rule of Britannia. And tonight he was supposed to fight alongside them, as they initiated their attack on the Tokyo settlement, even though he was going against his better judgment. His eyes focused in on the only nightmare frame that stood apart from all the others. Across from him amongst all the Burai stood the Gurren Mark II. And inside was a pilot that he knew very well. She was his girlfriend after all, or ex-girlfriend considering the situation. Colin is a girl his age with shoulder-length red hair that spikes out in the back, and dark blue eyes that were better compared to the color of the sea in contrast to his sky blue ones. Et tu, Colin? Naruto asked over his framed speaker system, some of the anger, sadness, and disappointment he felt leaking into his voice. I'm sorry, Naruto, Colin replied, doing her best to keep her voice as steady as possible. But we have to do this, for the good of Japan's future, she said, her voice sounding a lot stronger and confident than she was actually feeling at the moment. Is it for Japan or for Zero, Colin? Naruto thought, some bitterness seeping into his thoughts. He had often wondered what Colin would do if she was forced to pick between him and Zero. Guess I can stop wondering now. Out of the corner of the screen monitor his eye noticed another nightmare frame approaching. Taking a closer look he realized it was the Gawain, Zero's personal nightmare. Speak of the devil. Sorry, Naruto. Zero's voice was heard coming over the Gawain's speaker system, after he arrived to the soon-to-be battlefield, but you are an obstacle that stands in the way for my vision of Japan's liberation. What the hell are you talking about? Naruto demanded angrily, aren't we fighting for the same thing, for the same goal? You're wrong, Naruto, Zero replied coolly. Oh. Our goals are similar, Naruto, that much is true, but you lack the conviction necessary to fight against Britannia as you should. You say you want to free Japan from Britannia's rule, yet you will still put that freedom in jeopardy for the simple fact that you do not agree with the methods used. How can we possibly trust you if you are just as likely to fight against us as you are to fight with us? We cannot allow such an unpredictable variable to live, Naruto, so that is why you must die. I see, Naruto said with his face lowered, his voice barely coming above a whisper. And you all agree with him? He asked them as a whole. Though what he really wanted to know is if that is what Colin thought too. When he didn't get an answer to his question, he took it as a sign of their agreement and continued, very well then. I won't bother trying to change your minds if you all so strongly believe in what Zero is saying. He spoke solemnly. But, at that point the nine tails started to move more fiercely and wildly than before. As the tips opened up, releasing dark red blades from each tail before closing around them, so that each tail started to carve into the earth around the nightmare frame. If you think that I'm just going to let you kill me, then you are mistaken. The left eye of Naruto's nightmare turned black. Amaterasu. The black flames raced forward, hitting many of the burai that were directly in front of Naruto. Some of the burai pilots managed to eject before the flames reached them, but most weren't as lucky to avoid Amaterasu's all-consuming flames. Colin had known what signs to look for. So she had managed to move the Gurren out of harm's way before the fire was even close to reaching her. Immediately after the flames reached Naruto's first victims, a torrent of bullets were fired at the Crimson Knightmare by the encircling burai that remained in an attempt to destroy the fox-like nightmare, and kill the blonde pilot inside. The bladed tails reacted immediately, proving their worth as an automatic defense, moving at nearly impossible speeds, deflecting the barrage of bullets. Some of the deflected bullets impacted with the ground harmlessly, kicking up dust along the way. Others were shot back toward the guns they originally come from, and the remaining bullets hit a number of burai, causing substantial amounts of damage to them. Your nightmare's automatic defense is truly amazing, Naruto, second, probably, only to that of the Gawains. Zero mused to himself from inside the cockpit of his nightmare. Cease fire, he ordered, bullets are useless against him. Listening to their leader, all of the Black Knights stopped firing and waited for the dust to settle before they charged in. From within the cloud of dust, Naruto steadied his breathing and relaxed his muscles, preparing himself for the battle massacre that was about to happen. While he waited, Naruto reflected on how everything led to this moment, and how he came to live in a world filled with giant robots and advanced technology instead of ninja and jutsu. How his life changed by mere chance. He still refused to believe that something like fate existed. Flashback. On the waterfall that lead into the Valley of the End was a man watching two young genins battle, one wearing an orange jumpsuit, the other a high-collared blue short-sleeved shirt and shorts, both wearing the standard shinobi sandals. The man wore a black high-collared cloak with red clouds outlined in white and an orange spiraled mask that only had one eyehole. He had no real identity, it was something he had thrown away years ago. He went by different names, or titles depending how you wanted to look at it. Tobi, Madara Uchiha, and the true leader of Akatsuki were just some of them. Once upon a time, before he set his ultimate plan into motion, the Moon Eye Plan, he went by the name of Obito Uchiha. But that was long ago before. Right now who he was or wasn't couldn't be further from his mind. At the moment his only concern were the two young teens that were on the verge of killing each other, one his fellow clansman, the other the son of his sensei. Seeing the two boys charge at each other one last time caused the masked man to move to intercept them before they endangered his plans any further than they already had. I'll be forced to move up my plans by capturing the Kyuubi Jinchuriki, but it can't be helped. He thought to himself before he vanished by spiraling into himself. Damn it, Naruto cursed to himself, watching his opponent intently. Since he was woken up that morning why Shikamaru, he just knew that he would be having a bad day. His belief was only confirmed when he was told that Sasuke Uchiha, his teammate and rival, had left at some point last night to join Orochimaru. He wanted to deny it at first, but he resigned himself to the truth soon after when his other teammate, Sakura Haruno, confirmed Sasuke's leaving and then proceeded to beg him to bring the traitorous Uchiha back. He wasn't completely sure, but he believed that at that moment he honestly hated the pink-haired girl for the first time. He hadn't exactly kept his feelings for her a secret, but her to go up to him and then beg him to bring the Uchiha back to her, effectively killing any feelings he might have had for her. Flashback end. Naruto chuckled humorlessly as he remembered that moment. I cross over into a different dimension and yet the girl I fall for still chooses the black-haired, arrogant, revenge-driven, pretty boy over me. The blonde-haired pilot thought somberly, Cammy must seriously hate me or something. He didn't dwell on it for much longer. The dust had begun to settle and he refused to let those sheep who called themselves knights have the first chance to strike. The pilots inside the Burai watched as the dust from the bullets that impacted with the ground began to clear. They assumed that their opponent would refrain from fighting in an attempt to stay alive for as long as possible. They didn't know Naruto Uzumaki all that well. From inside the dust cloud the Crimson Knightmare burst out heading toward the closest group of 14 or so Burai, moving faster than they thought possible, taking everyone, except select few, by surprise at his sudden charge. 4 of the 9 tails moved forward, deflecting the bullets that the Japanese pilots had fired solely due to their self-preservation instinct. The other 5 tails sliced through just as many of the Japanese modified Glasgows. Stretching the Fox Nightmare's arms out to its side, Naruto fired the slash Harken that each arm had, hitting a couple of Burai before he swung them around and tossed them into another pair of the Japanese Nightmare frames. Finally regaining their senses, the remaining 5 Burai fired their own slash Harken at their opponent, attempting to restrain him long enough to land a decisive blow. The slash Harken came close, but eventually they were all cut down by the fox's tails like the bullets were. Speeding toward them, Naruto cut into all 5 Burai with the clawed hands of his nightmare that glowed in a faint light blue before they stopped. Not even a second later the Burai all fell to the ground, each having various claw marks on their frames. Releasing a steady breath, Naruto righted his nightmare so it was standing straight up, waiting for his opponents to make the next move. While he waited, his mind once more returned back to the past, his memories of that day continuing from where he left off. Flashback. But still he promised her he'd bring Sasuke back, if for no other reason than to make sure his former teammate paid for abandoning their village. So he set out, along with Shikamaru Nara, Choji Akamaiki, Kiba Inuzuka and his Ninken Akamaru, and finally Neji Hyuga. The retrieval team was quickly forced to separate when they encountered the Sound Four, each of them forced to fight their own opponent. Choji fought against Jirobo, Neji took the spider freak Kitamura, Kiba and Akamaru against the brothers Sakin and Ukin, and Shikamaru fought against Tayuya, the only female member of the Sound Four. Leaving Naruto to press ahead, though he had to stop momentarily with the arrival of Kimimaro, the leader of the Sound Four, but he was able to continue his chase of the last Uchiha when Rock Lee arrived to fight the last bone user. When Naruto finally caught up to the Uchiha, they were at the Valley of the End, a location famously known for the fight between Madara Uchiha, founder and leader of the Uchiha clan, and Hashirama Senju, Shodaime Hokage of Konohagakure no Sato. At first Naruto had tried to convince Sasuke to return with him, but the Uchiha had refused to listen to anything Naruto had to say, so with no other options the two began their battle. Sasuke, I'm giving you one more chance to stop this, Naruto shouted to the monster his former teammate had become. His skin had become an ashy gray, with the power of the second level of the curse seal he had been able to achieve. On the bridge of his nose a black 4-pointed star had appeared and the sclera of his eyes becoming black, the 3 tomes of the Sharingan spinning lazily in his eyes, and his lips having turned a blue color. His hair had grown out more and dulled in color, and had 2 hands like wings coming out of his back. I told you, Naruto, that the time for talking is over. Nothing you say will convince me to go back, so let's just end this. The Avenger shouted back, creating a Chidori in his hand, the blue lighting turning black with all the curse marks corrupted chakra Sasuke was pushing into it. Naruto let out a heavy sigh, gathering chakra into his hand, the mixture of his normal chakra and the Kyuubi's Yuki, creating a purple-hued Rasengan, for one final clash with his former best friend. When both jutsu were fully charged, the 2 boys leapt at each other at an unsaid signal. With shouts of Chidori, Rasengan, the 2 met in the middle, chaos surged from the point that their jutsu collided. A second, he was a split second too late to stop them. Toby couldn't believe that all his careful planning was being destroyed because he was a split second too late. By the time he had reappeared between the 2 genin, their attacks had already met. But things only got worse when his arrival caused an unexpected reaction. He knew something had happened. Because he could feel his body being torn to shreds, his chakra being taken from him, and could see the same thing happening to his fellow Uchiha, while the Kyuubi Jinchuriki was being protected by the Biju's cloak, leaving him relatively unharmed. Toba's attempts to activate his Jikuken Ido, which allowed himself, or anything that he was touching, be transported to a separate dimension. only made the pain he felt worse as more of his chakra was taken from him at a faster rate. He could see the tainted chakra of the curse seal mixing with the Yuki energy that the blonde Jinchuriki was releasing. His vision started to grow dark and the masked Uchiha knew that his time was coming to an end, but as he watched the chakras mix together he noticed something. It started off faintly as small ripple in space where the Chidori and Rasengan met, barely anything at all, but slowly it grew in intensity and the ripple became a tear in space. Before everything went completely black he nodded. That the chakra he used for the Jikuken Ito was also converging with the other two energy sources creating the tear in space. He also noticed that the amount of chakra that went into the tear wasn't consistent with how much chakra he had lost. So where was the rest of his chakra going? Naruto could also see the tear in space and could feel himself being pulled into it. He also noticed the strand GE individual in the orange spiraled mask who had appeared beside him, but his attention was mostly focused on the boy across from him. His sapphire blue eyes were filled with regret and sorrow, as he watched the life slowly drain away from the eyes of his friend and rival. He had failed to save someone precious to him and had unintentionally broken a promise he made to another of his precious people. Even if he was unsure how to feel about her at the moment. He knew of course that there was nothing he could do at the moment to save Sasuke's life, but for right now he would mourn for the person he considered his brother. Goodbye Sasuke. The blonde Uzumaki thought before he was pulled into the tear in space. When Naruto opened his eyes again he was in a sewer that he had only visited a couple of times before. Picking himself up from the murky water, his clothes strangely not wet, he began trudging toward where he knew the Kyuubi's cage to be located in a daze. Walking into the room that contained Kyuubi, Naruto didn't even register the fact that the once closed iron gates that once housed the great demon fox were now wide open, and the piece of paper with the kanji for seal floated uselessly in the ankle-high water. Well, what an interesting turn of events this came out to be, huh Naruto? A dark voice asked him, a pair of crimson slit eyes snapping open from the unending darkness that lied behind the gate. At the sound of his name Naruto came out of his daze registering the fact that he stood in front of Kyuubi with nothing in between them. His body grew tense waiting for the mighty beast to jump out at him in an attempt to consume him like it's threatened to do before. What the hell do you want, fox? Naruto shouted out at the demon fox edgily. I don't know how you broke the seal. But I won't let you attack Konoha. He shouted pulling out a kunai from his pouch. There is no need for that kit. Kyuubi said disinterestedly, besides even if I wanted to TTACK your little village that is no longer possible. Naruto gave Kyuubi an uncertain look, what do you mean it's no longer possible? He asked putting the kunai hesitantly away. We are no longer anywhere near Konoha. We are not even in the same dimension. The fox answered him, how is that even possible? The sapphire-eyed boy questioned the demon fox confusedly and a bit of distrust. I'll explain. But first it might be best if I transformed into my human form. Kyuubi said, and before Naruto could question the demon fox about what it was talking about, the giant crimson eyes disappeared. From the darkness walked out a girl that looked a couple years older than him, long crimson hair with a few bangs framing her angelic heart-shaped face, her skin a healthy tan color a little lighter than his own. She wore a dark red kimono top that left her shoulders bare allowing for a generous view of her C-cup breasts, a black obi tied around her waist, and black cloth arm warmers on each hand tied by red string. A red knee-length skirt with black frills at the end and black shinobi sandals. On the back of her shirt there was a picture of her in her fox form. What finally convinced Naruto that this was Kyuubi were her crimson slit eyes. So how do I look, Naruto-kun? She asked the shocked teen. Naruto at the moment was doing a good impression of a fish, his mouth opening and closing in an effort to say something. But nothing would come out. Why you're a girl? Naruto was finally able to sputter out in shock. Kyuubi's eyebrow started to twitch while a tick mark appeared, what be? 'Cause I'm the strongest demon to ever exist automatically means that I have to be male. Kyuubi shouted indignantly, hands on her hips. No. No. Naruto said quickly, waving his hands back and forth in denial. I was just surprised, and with how masculine your voice was when you were a giant fox I kind of just assumed you were a guy. Well, that's obviously not the case. Is that going to a problem? She asked him sweetly, too sweetly in Naruto's opinion. None whatsoever, the blonde-haired boy instantly replied. Good, then we can continue with the explanation about what's happened. Kyuubi stated with a smile, we were pulled through a rift in space when your jutsu clashed with that of the Uchiha and that masked shinobi appeared between you two thanks to a space-time jutsu. A smirk spread across her face, and because my Yuki was protecting you, you weren't killed like those two idiots were by the tear. The red-haired vixen said smugly before letting out a sigh. Though I've lost most of my power from crossing into this dimension, she muttered mostly to herself. What do you mean you lost most of your power? Naruto asked cutting in, and who was that guy anyway? That man was an Uchiha, that's all you really need to know for now. The Demon Queen began, and I didn't really lose my power, it's more like I can't access it. She continued knowing that she will need to explain. While I still have all my Yuki, we each can only use about one tael worth of power at a time. Each. Does that mean that you're still going to be with me? Naruto asked, getting a nod from Kyuubi. Why? Why not? Kyuubi replied, shrugging her shoulders, unintentionally drawing Naruto's attention to her chest before he quickly looked away, his face a light red. You keep things interesting. Now I think it's time you wake up, Naruto, and see what this new world has to offer. Kyuubi said before Naruto started to fade away. There are still things we need to talk about, so see you soon, Naruto. She finished just as Naruto disappeared completely. Opening his eyes groggily, Naruto was able to notice a few things right away. First, that it was dark out, which probably meant that it was night time. Second, he was lying on the ground. Lastly, that there was currently someone shaking Naruto's shoulder trying to get his attention. Hey kid, are you alright? The distinctively male voice asked him. Naruto let out a groan in reply, as he tried to sit up despite the protests of the guy beside him. His body was a bit shaky, can't cross over into a different dimensions. Ion without suffering some sort of aftereffects, but he was eventually able to sit up, so he was no longer lying on his back. Where am I? The blonde dimension hopper asked. You're right outside of the ghetto. The unknown male answered him. Ghetto? Naruto asked confusedly. Yeah, you know what's left of what once was Shinjuku. Oh, the shinobi muttered, holding his head trying to shake away the remaining cobwebs. Are you alright? Maybe you should lie back down and get a bit more rest. The male suggested. No, I'm fine, my mind is just a bit foggy, that's all. Naruto replied. Looking towards the guy, Naruto tried to make out some sort of details to at least get an idea of what he looked like, but it was hard to do with no light, and having the moon blocked out by a few clouds didn't help. He didn't sound too much older than him to Naruto. He could tell the guy had dark-colored shoulder-length hair, a bandana around his head, and dark blue eyes. Can you tell me what's been going on lately to help jog my memory? The cerulean-eyed shinobi asked as innocently as he could. The older teen gave Naruto a strange look, at least Naruto thought he did, but complied to his request anyway. So he told him about the Holy Britannian Empire, the existence of nightmare frames, and how the Britannians used them to invade and conquer Japan, renaming it Area 11 afterwards. Then why help me? Naruto asked him after the teen was done explaining. From the way you talk about it, you're obviously Japanese, so why help me when for all you know I could be Britannian? The teen let out a chuckle before replying. Actually, I kind of figured you were Britannian from your blonde hair. There aren't that many Japanese people with that hair color, though I don't know what to make of your clothes. I mean seriously, man, what is up with the bright orange jacket and pants? If I didn't notice your hair, then I would have definitely seen your clothes, he joked. What's everyone's problem with the color orange? It's an awesome color. Naruto grumbled, so why help me? The shinobi asked again. The teen was silent for a minute before he answered, I can never forgive Britannia for what they've done to my home. And I promise to help free it someday. But that doesn't mean that I'm going to hold every Britannian I meet accountable for things they had no control over. The short-haired teen said with conviction in his voice. That's definitely something I can respect. Naruto commented with a grin. Plus I have a younger sister that is about your age. The teen added, I'd want someone to help her if she needed it. Is that so? Naruto mused before standing up. Hey, you really shouldn't be moving around like that. We should get you to a hospital to make sure you're alright. The teen suggested. Nah, I'm perfectly fine, Naruto said, stretching a bit to get the kinks out of his muscles. Are you sure? The teen asked him concernedly. Yeah, Naruto said offhandedly. Thanks for the helping me though. My name is Naruto Uzumaki by the way. Naruto said, introducing himself. Through the darkness Naruto could just barely manage to tell that the older teen was smiling back at him. It's nice to meet you Naruto. I'm. Flashback end. Naoto Kazuki, Naruto said, whispering the name of the first person he met in this world. Shifting his nightmare to the right, Naruto was just able to dodge Higuren's clawed right hand, barely missing having his nightmare's head ripped off. Immediately after, Naruto had to jump back to avoid the slash Harken that Colin had fired, his nightmare's tails not being able to block the projectiles from such close range. Please Naruto, if you surrender peacefully we might be able to convince Zero that this isn't necessary, Colin pleaded with him over the loudspeakers of her nightmare. Your sister has come a long way Naoto, Naruto thought silently to himself. And by this, I assume you mean killing me. The former Jinchuriki questioned her, he wasn't expecting her to give him an answer. We both know that's not going to happen. Naruto replied, although he wasn't very clear if he was talking about him surrendering or being allowed to live. The T-Wo just stared at each other for a moment, both wishing that things had turned out differently. Naruto made his nightmare jump into the air away from Colin before diving toward another group of Burai. In order to avoid fighting her for a while longer. I've already said this before, I'm not going to let you just kill me. So if you really mean to kill me then come at me with everything you've got. Naruto shouted. It had been 3 years since the night Naruto had first woken up in this new world, and met Naoto, though he hadn't seen the older teen since. Since then he had been working hard to fulfill 3 separate objectives. The first, create an identity for him in this world. Second, he needed to find a source of income. And finally he needed to continue training in order to get stronger so he could help anyone that needed it. He remembered having to fight some Britannian soldiers the night he arrived, though he didn't know it at the time, which Kyuubi told him were filled with Malicio. Us intent not too long after he parted ways with Naoto. Thanks to his shinobi training it was easy to accomplish his first goal and forge the documents he would need in this world. It amazed Naruto how easy it was to get past the security that most of the buildings he infiltrated to create the forged documents had. Kyuubi figured that it was most likely due to the fact that the people of this dime and Scion didn't know what a trained shinobi was capable of. Naruto realized that if people here didn't know what a shinobi was capable of then he could use it to his advantage. He ended up listing himself as an orphan, half Britannian and half Japanese with no records on whom his parents could be. When it came to his second objective, Naruto had actually managed to find 3 different ways to get money. He figured he'd eventually need the extra financial security. The first had been thanks to both Jiraiya and the Toads of Mount Myobokuzen. About 3 months after arriving, Jiraiya had managed to make contact with him through the summoning contract that Jiraiya and he shared. Gamakichi had been able to deliver a letter from the perverted sage saying that he had been looking for Naruto since the blonde had disappeared. They had at first tried to pull Naruto back to the elemental nations through a process called reverse summoning, but no matter how hard they tried, something interfered with the Toad's ability to summon him. The same thing happened when Jiraiya tried to have himself summoned to where his blonde apprentice was located. They finally decided that it was a miracle that the Toads could reach him at all. After Naruto told Jiraiya about needing to find a way to make money in this world, Jiraiya had sent Naruto the entire Ika Ika series, telling him to have it published in that world. Naruto was at first reluctant to do so, but eventually relented to the Toad Sage's suggestion after Jiraiya told him just how wealthy the perverted novel made him. Naruto had then demanded to know why the old pervert insisted on taking his hard-earned cash if he had so much after Jiraiya had told him that. To obtain his second source of income, Naruto relied on his shinobi training again to make it possible. He had liberated money from many corrupt businessmen and politicians. Naruto wasn't all that comfortable with this until Kyuubi convinced him that by doing this he was crippling those who would otherwise abuse the power that money gave them. Naruto remembered how Gato used his money to oppress the people of Nami no Kuni, and any of the guilt he felt about what he was doing disappeared. It astounded Naruto how greedy some of the people he hit could be. It was only surpassed by his amazement at how much they seemed to enjoy flaunting their wealth to one another. His stealth abilities weren't even challenged. as he spent a couple of days at most following some of his targets before he was able to gather the passwords and codes needed to access where the greedy bastards kept most of their fortune. For anything that needed a biological signature to access, he simply used his transformation jutsu, a true transformation unlike the one taught at the academy. Any money Naruto took from any of his targets, he made sure that it was only a small amount, so that the people he was stealing from wouldn't become overly suspicious and start looking into what was happening to their fortunes if large amounts started to disappear. As long as it was only a small amount, the people who were having their money stolen from right underneath them, they blew it off as unimportant, many having secret dealings that they didn't want other people looking into. Naruto made sure to hit his targets multiple times when it was safe enough to do so, that way he was able to cripple them financially as much as he could. Naruto then invested some of the money he acquired into different companies that Kyuubi approved of course, taking over most of them in the process, and often being from the people he stole from in the first place. He then had his newly acquired companies start giving supplies, food, clothes, medicine, for free or at a reduced price to the people of Area 11 that needed it. Though this mostly consisted to giving the supplies to 11s. This wasn't something that the Britannian elite exactly approved of, but Naruto couldn't care less what they thought. For his last source of income, Naruto decided to create a band with just himself and a few transformed shadow clones. When Kyuubi asked him why he started a band, Naruto shrugged his shoulders and simply replied, "I just felt like it." And that was that. Thanks to shinobi being trained to be able to change their voices to anyone else's, Naruto was able to change his so it sounded perfect while he was singing. He was also able to learn how to play a variety of different instruments thanks to the secret ability of the shadow clones, after Kyuubi had told him about it. His training had started off slowly, no place to really train without the chance of being caught by someone, but after acquiring a few companies he was able to buy a private plot of land, a few of them actually, he was able to train without having to worry about being found out. Jiraiya once again pulled through for him and sent the blonde teen many different training scrolls along with a few jutsu that, along with Kyuubi's help, helped him improve quickly. Kyuubi proved to be a real slave driver when it came to his training, refusing to let her former container and now partner be weak no matter the circumstances. His relationship with Kyuubi was something that changed over the last few years. After a few months of being in this world, they had discovered that Kyuubi could actually come out of the seal whenever she wanted. When Kyuubi first came out of the seal, Naruto had been worried about how people would react to seeing a giant nine-tailed demon fox suddenly appear in the middle of a city. Naruto was on the verge of a panic attack when a burst of smoke signaled Kyuubi's appearance into the real world, only to fall over laughing when the smoke cleared to reveal a small one-tailed fox that was no bigger than Akamaru was back home. Kyuubi promptly bit the laughing teen's hand and refused to let go for a good 10 minutes. She had still been able to retain her ability to transform into a human form and preferred to stay that way whenever the two-dimension travelers were alone, but was usually in her fox form whenever there was anybody else in the room with them she didn't particularly care about, or when she was feeling lazy and wanted to nap on Naruto's lap, around his shoulders, or on top of his head. After a year of really knowing each other and working together, Kyuubi revealed to Naruto that her real name was Amami and that Kyuubi was only a title. From that point on, the two had become even closer, becoming almost like family to one another. Naruto wasn't 100% sure, but he felt that his relationship with Amami was what it was like to have an older sister, with how she would always push him to improve himself and took every opportunity she could to embarrass him. Naruto didn't just train physically, Amami also had him break into libraries after they closed at night, and got him to fill them with shadow clones, so that he could learn as much as possible. She swore that all the other Biju were laughing behind her back at how stupid her former container was back in their home dimension, and refused to let him to be an idiot in this world as well. Besides, she began one day, "It's pointless to be the head of your own company if you can't even run it." Of course it wasn't all great. Half a year ago an old toad called Fukusaku, though everyone called him Pa, had contacted Naruto and told him that Jiraiya had died fighting what remained of Akatsuki, though Itachi Uchiha had disappeared a year or two before. The old pervert didn't do it alone though he had the help from Kakashi, Meta Guy, Gaara, who had become the Godime Kazekage, the Raikage of Kumogakure, and his younger brother Killer Bee. When Naruto asked why two Kumo shinobi would help them defeat Akatsuki, Fukusaku had informed him that B was also the Hachibi Jinchuriki and that Akatsuki had attempted to capture him earlier, infuriating the Raikage. Before the old toad had left, Naruto had some of the best alcohol in that world bought and had asked him to deliver it to Tsunade with the message for her to drink for the three of them. For the next couple of days Naruto mourned for his dead teacher. Fukusaku D also left with the blonde a couple of things that Jiraiya wanted him to have. One was his entire Fuinjutsu notes, the other was the first book Jiraiya had ever published, The Tale of the Utterly Guts. Why Ninja, with a note in the back saying how it was that book that inspired his parents to give him the name Naruto, after the hero of the story, how proud Jiraiya had been of the person Naruto had become. And that he couldn't be more honored to have been the one given the privilege of naming him along with being the boy's godfather. That last revelation had hurt the blonde-haired shinobi, to know that he had family so close and never knew, but it also made him incredibly happy that his godfather was proud of him despite his initial shortcomings as a shinobi. After that Amami felt that it was best time to reveal a couple of other hidden truths to Naruto, specifically who his parents were. Shocked couldn't even begin to describe how Naruto felt when he learned that his father was Minato Namikaze, the Yondaime Hokage. It was only matched with the shock he felt at learning that his mother, Kushina Uzumaki, was Amami's former container. Things had been a bit tense between the blonde and the red-haired vixen for a while. But things slowly returned to normal between them, and it was only helped by the fact that Amami could tell Naruto stories about Kushina back when she was a kunoichi. In order to honor the memory of his parents, Naruto renamed one of the major companies he controlled into Namikaze Corporation, in memory of his father, while choosing to keep his mother's maiden name. That wasn't Amami's only revelation. She then told him how while they were being brought into this world, chakra from both Uchihas was being absorbed by him, and that it finally stabilized inside him, changing his DNA slightly. When Naruto questioned the red-headed vixen on what she was talking about, she replied that the influx of chakra had made it possible for him to activate the Uchiha clan's famous dujutsu, the Sharingan. Naruto didn't believe her at first, but after he channeled some chakra into his eyes, like Amami asked him, he watched in a mirror, as his sky-blue eyes shifted into Crimson red with 3 black tones in each eye. Looking into those blood-red eyes reminded Naruto of the last time he had seen eyes just like them and the grief he felt watching his best friend die while he survived. And how he inadvertently played a part in his death. The resurfacing guilt consumed Naruto before he even realized it, causing a change in his eyes that neither he nor Amami expected. His eyes evolved into the Mangekyo Sharingan. For the next 6 months Naruto trained in mastering the abilities of the Sharingan and Mangekyo Sharingan. In those 6 months Naruto could use Amaterasu effectively. Though the chakra control necessary for Tsukuyomi made it so he could only hold it for a day and a half, unlike Itachi who could hold his illusion for 3 days, and the supposed third ability of the Mangekyo Sharingan, Susanoo, was completely out of his reach. He was at least thankful that Amami was able to heal the damage caused by the Mangekyo Sharingan. With so many different resources at Naruto's disposal, he began building a personal nightmare frame, creating a nightmare that was more advanced than any nightmare created so far. It infused some of the world's most advanced technology along with making the frame out of chakra-conductive metal that Naruto was able to recreate with Amami's help. The date was August 10 in the year 2010 of the imperial calendar, the Holy Bridge. Itanian Empire had just declared war on Japan. The Far East Island nation had held fast to its neutrality, and now Britannia looms as the world's only superpower. Rights to Japan's underground resources became a hotly disputed issue, straining the already deep-rooted diplomatic tensions between the two sides. In the deciding battle for the mainland, Britannian forces introduced into combat the humanoid anatomist's armored knight known as the Nightmare Frame. The enemy's forces were far greater than anticipated, and the Nightmares obliterated the Japanese line of defense on the mainland with little effort. Japan became a dominion of the empire. The country was stripped of its freedom, its rights, and its name. Area 11, the defeated and once proud nation of Japan, was rechristened with a mere number. Though unknown to the world, an unidentified variable will play a part in changing its entire destiny. Here is video footage of yesterday's terrorist bombings in Osaka. The news played in the background, for the most part ignored by the occupants of a room in the Tokyo settlement, as balding elderly man played chess. He lifted up a chess piece, his hand shaking fearfully, trying to think best to put it without it costing him the match. The other occupants of the room consisted of 5 bodyguards, thugs wearing black suits and dark shades, and a man with short brown hair wearing noble clothing that fit his social ranking. The elder had just finished putting his piece down when a timer went off signaling the time was up. "You're out of time," one of the men acting as a judge told him. "From here on you'll make your moves every 20 seconds. The man's opponent, the nobleman, casually filed his nails with an utterly bored and uncaring look on his face, responded, "Hey, very well, I'm game." Panicking slightly, the elder looked towards the board, his eyes shifting around the room, quickly trying to find some way to prolong the match when the elevator doors opened up behind him. "Oh, did you substitute arrive?" the nobleman questioned rhetorically, as the elderly man hastily got up from his chair with a relief quickly spreading across his face. "Oh, thank heavens, I'm saved," the elder said, letting out a sigh. "Are things going well at school?" he asked one of the 2 boys that came out of the elevator. "What have we here, school boys?" the noble asked, taking in their appearance. The first boy wore the standard male uniform for Ashford Academy, black coat with yellow accents, a white collared shirt underneath, black pants and shoes, with a lean body, shoulder-length BL. Hair that was framed around his face so only a few strands fell over it. He had violet-colored eyes with a smirk plastered across his face, as he stared down at the nobleman. The other boy was wearing the same thing, only he had a helmet, with goggles on top, over his blue head of hair that spiked out slightly near the front, elbow-length gloves over his hands, and had light gray eyes. "Well, look at this, a nobleman," the black-haired boy replied. "I envy you kids today. You have so much time on your hands, time for regrets." "What's your name?" the nobleman asked the black-haired boy rudely. "Lelouch," the violet-eyed boy answered, walking over to sit in the seat previously occupied by the older man, Lamperouge. Lelouch said smoothly, not at all bothered by the noble's tone of voice. It was something he had grown accustomed to hearing when he was younger. Lamperouge, it was a fake name that he and his sister, Nunally, used to hide from their past. Their real names were Lelouch and Nunally v Britannia. Son and daughter to the current Emperor of Britannia, Charles Z. Britannia, the one man that Lelouch hated most in the world. The blue-haired boy walked past his classmate and looked down at the chess board in astonishment once he noticed the position of the chess pieces. "Oh whoa, now wait a minute, there is no way you can win this one, it's impossible, right?" the other boy questioned his friend. "Rivals," Lelouch began to say to the now identified rivals. "When do you think we'll need to leave in order to make our next class?" 20 minutes if we bust our hump." Riva. LZ answered, taken back slightly by his friend's sudden question. "Then be sure to drive safely on the way back. This will only take 9 minutes." Lelouch stated, sitting down in the chair that the old man had occupied. The black chess pieces in front of him, and by the way, about yesterday. The old man nodded his head respectively. "Understood, sir, we will discuss it later." 9 minutes. You only have 20 seconds per move. The noble said in disbelief at the black-haired boy's claim. Lelouch looked at the noble, unconcerned by his time limit. "Enough time," he said seriously, picking up his king. You start with the king?" the noble asked before he burst out laughing in clear amusement. Lelouch didn't bother replying, though he did smile slightly. In another part of the Tokyo settlement, a truck was speeding down the highway trying to escape the pursuing law enforcement. There were 2 people inside the speeding truck, both wearing light blue uniforms with light blue hats on top of their heads. The one driving the truck was male with long black hair tied into a ponytail. The other person's face was hidden by their hat, making it impossible to tell what gender they were, but EY had red hair with 2 long bangs in the front framing their face and their hair spread out in the back. "Perfect, after we finally steal this damn thing. It's all because Tamaki couldn't stick to Naoto's plan and now we've got a problem." The black-haired complained angrily to his silent companion. A pen landed on the floor, the sound of it hitting the ground echoing throughout the room, as the Britannian noble stared at the board in shock, looking at his only piece, the king, that remained on the board surrounded by Lelouch's black pieces. Then his gaze shifted toward the boy in question. O looked at him with the same calm, indifferent look he's had since he first walked into the room. The noble's face, while still filled with shock, also gained a hint of anger in his features. How dare you give me that look, boy? As if you're better than me. The same look that bastard always gives me, like he is my superior. The noble raged angrily toward the black-haired boy. He continued to watch him calmly, not reacting at all to the noble's anger. I have no idea what or who you're talking about, Lelouch stated evenly, standing up, but we're done here. Have a nice day, nobleman. He finished, entering the elevator with rivals right behind him. The noble seemed to only grow more agitated with the boy's words, but before he could say anything to Lelouch, the elevator doors closed. The last look the noble caught of the black-haired boy was the calm indifference in his eyes, and how easily the noble could picture those violet-colored eyes being a sky blue. I love playing against the nobility. When they lose they always pay out of pride, Rivals said cheerfully. By the way, 8 minutes 32 seconds is a new record. He finished praising his friend at setting a new record for defeating an opponent in a game of chess. He didn't have much time to move either. And as opponents go, the nobles are tepid. They are just overprivileged parasites, that's all, Lelouch replied uncaringly. Well then, why don't you challenge one of the 11s? They are nothing like us Britannians, Rivals suggested to his friend, getting a thoughtful hum from Lelouch. Seeing as his friend wasn't going to say anything else on the subject, Rivals decided to change it, knowing there was no real point in trying to get Lelouch to talk about something he lost interest in. Who do you figure it was that the noble was talking about after you beat him? I have no idea, the violet-eyed boy answered honestly. Probably just another nobleman, he supplied uncaringly. Speeding down the highway on a black ND orange custom-built motorcycle was Naruto, wearing an orange helmet that completely covered his head, an unzipped black cargo jacket, a form-fitting orange t-shirt underneath, dark blue jeans, and a pair of black steel-toed boots. A ringing caught his attention, causing him to press the side of his helmet to answer the private phone he had built in, a number only one person had so far. Hello Uzumaki Ramen. Naruto. Uzumaki speaking. What can I get you? The blonde teen asked innocently. Naruto. Uzumaki, where the hell are you? The familiar voice of Amami shouted into his ear from the other end, causing Naruto to swerve slightly from the pain his ears were subjugated to. Ow, Naruto mumbled. Ah, Amami, what a surprise to hear from you. He finished faux cheerfulness. Surprise my furry red ass, where are you? She asked him again. I decided to go for a relaxing ride in the settlement, Naruto answered her. And I suppose the fact that there are terrorists in the area has nothing to do with it. Amami questioned him with what he was sure was a raised eyebrow, or the fact that you're supposed to be in a business meeting right now. Can't you take care of it? Naruto asked the red-headed vixen hopefully. I'm not going anywhere near those perverted old bastards, she answered him seriously before hanging up. Naruto didn't even get a chance to groan his displeasure before he heard the voices of the businessmen come through the line, and immediately figured that the devious fox and forwarded him to the meeting. Uzumaki, where are you? We've been waiting for a good 30 minutes. One of the businessmen demanded. Naruto let out a mental sigh before speaking as politely as possible. Sorry gentlemen, but something very important came up and I had to step out. He lied smoothly. What could be more important than finalizing our business agreement? Another of the businessmen inquired arrogantly. Just about everything, Naruto thought silently to himself. About that, I'm afraid that Namikaze Corp will have to decline your business offer, as it goes against our objectives, he said again in a false polite tone. What? The two businessmen shouted, causing Naruto to wince from having someone scream in his ear for the second time that day. But this deal will see an increase in both our company's income, the second businessman argued. Correction, Naruto stated somewhat coldly. It will see a 24.3% increase in your company's profits, while Namikaze Corp will only see a 2% increase in the prices of a majority of our merchandise being raised, so that they'll only be available toward the Britannian community, leaving the Japanese people without one of their major suppliers for goods. I simply cannot allow that. The stunned silence he received afterwards. Ow. Most had the cerulean-eyed boy chuckling. Don't think that just because I'm young you can trick me into agreeing to such a crummy deal. Besides, if I didn't catch on to your little trick then my partner would have. He finished offhandedly. Why do you care so much for those worthless 11s? The second businessman asked Naruto, angrily ignoring the fact that they were trying to cheat him. You won't get far in this world if you continue to support them like you have Uzumaki. Don't you know? The first businessman asked his partner, the sneer evident in his voice. Uzumaki is only half Brita. One of his parents was a dirty 11. The boy must feel some sort obligation to his fellow trash. He said before continuing to speak to Naruto. Isn't that right, half-bred? Half-bred huh, I guess you're right, I'm only half Britannian after all. Naruto admitted calmly, not at all perturbed by the fact that the man knew that piece of information, seeing as it wasn't technically true. And he never bothered trying to hide the fact he listed himself as half Britannian and half Japanese. That's something I don't understand about you full-blooded Britannians, you believe that just because of a mere circumstance of birth that it makes you better than all the areas you've conquered. Yet right now you are the ones who need to make this deal with my company, aren't you? He asked them, but didn't wait for an answer. Gentlemen, you've wasted enough of my time and you have 5 minutes to get out of my company before security removes you from the premises. What Uzuma? You can't do tea. Goodbye, gentlemen. Naruto finished cutting off the two businessmen before they could finish and ended the call. Happy now? Naruto asked after a couple of minutes. Quite, now if only they would stop making so much noise. Amami's voice answered him, having called the blonde-haired shinobi again. Once she heard the yelling begin from the conference room, she knew that Naruto was supposed to be having his meeting. By the way, have you seen the latest news? She asked him, and receiving a no from him. I'll send the video feed to your motorcycle's onboard computer, she said before the screen on his motorcycle turned on and began playing, showing footage of a building with smoke coming out of it. And thanks to Amami training him to be able to sense chakra and his basic shinobi training to always be aware of his surroundings, Naruto didn't have to worry about crashing into anyone or anything. The video then changed to show the Britannian flag. We apologize for the delay, now His Royal Highness Prince Clovis, Third Prince of Britannia, will address the nation, the announcer said before the screen changed once again to show a male with long blonde hair that fell to his mid-back, blue eyes, and dressed in expensive-looking clothes that was reserved for royalty. To all my imperial subjects, including of course the many cooperative 11s who choose to serve the Empire of Britannia. Clovis began moving his hands in a grand gesture, as he spoke. In the truck the two occupants were watching the news feed when the passenger finally spoke up after the third prince's last comment. We are not 11s, we are Japanese, the passenger shouted in what was obviously a female voice. Do you not see my pain? My heart was ripped from my chest only to be torn apart. The blonde prince said, gripping at his chest and closing his eyes. The remnants are filled with rage and sadness. However, as ruler of Area 11, I will not tolerate terrorism of any kind. Because the battle we fight is a righteous one. A virtuous battle to protect to the well-being of one and all. Now then everyone, I would like you to join me in observance of the 8 who died for justice in the line of duty. He finished before the announcer from before asked for a moment of silence. I'm not sure to either be impressed by his acting skills, if not a bit overdramatic, or be disgusted by the fact that he's hosting a party while all this is happening. Naruto thought with a scowl, looking at the image of one of the princes of Britannia, having received an invitation to attend the party himself, cutting the feed at that point. So do you know if anything else has happened? Naruto asked the Crimson Vixen. Yeah, apparently the Japanese who attacked that building managed to steal some medical supplies. Or at least that's what they stole according to the information the Britannian government released to the public. The truck the Japanese escaped in is also currently being followed by law enforcement. Amami answered. You think they're trying to hide something? Naruto replied, referring to her comment about the Britannian government. Most likely, the redhead admitted honestly, Namikaze Corp. Supplies more than enough medical supplies to the Japanese. It's very likely that our little Japanese freedom fighters have been able to get a hold of at least some of the supplies for themselves. So there's no reason for them steal any. Plus I looked into it myself and what I found was that reports say that they stole poison gas. She finished. The blonde-haired boy raised an eyebrow at that. Poison gas. Naruto questioned no one in particular, a smirk spreading across his face. You know, I think that things are finally starting to get interesting, the cerulean-eyed boy said excitedly. His fox-like grin spreading across his face under his helmet. What are you planning, Naruto? Amami asked the blonde-haired boy suspiciously. I think that it's about time that I took a more active role in this war. Naruto answered her. I'll call you later. He finished, ending the chat, driving off the highway and pulling into an alley where he sealed away his bike into a storage seal he had located on his arm. Naruto then sent more chakra into the seal on his arm, unsealing some shinobi clothing that he had secretly made in this world, and a couple of things he was sent from the elemental nations after Jiraiya's death. Once he changed into his new clothes, Naruto disappeared in a leaf shunshin and began his search for the truck that supposedly transported the poisonous gas. When Naruto Fina.Lly found the truck, it had just swerved off the road and crashed into the empty construction site. A boy with black hair that he would guess was about his age wearing school clothes had gone down to HELP while all the other Britannians watched the accident like they would an animal in a zoo. Naruto was disgusted by how they were all acting. Before Naruto could do anything to help, the truck pulled out of where it crashed, causing the boy who had climbed onto the top to fall inside the back through a hatch. Naruto followed after them quickly, his speed being more than enough to keep up with them. Stop the vehicle, a voice called from above. Looking up, Naruto could see 3 military copters following after the hijacked truck. Surrender now and you get the chance to defend yourself in court. Stop and surrender at once. Another pilot ordered before he opened fire on the truck, though they didn't come anywhere close to hitting the truck and only served as warning shots. Give up now or we shoot to kill, the final pilot said, making their intentions clear. Now what do we do? That's the army. Nagata asked the passenger from inside the truck. Have you forgotten that's what I am here for? The passenger said, taking off her hat, revealing a young woman with dark blue eyes, a heart-shaped face, a red bandana around her head, and shoulder-length dark red hair that stuck out in the back with the 2 bangs framing her face. She got up from the seat and proceeded to walk towards the back of the vehicle, removing the blue coat to revealing red and brown clothes underneath. I don't even know where to begin in describing her clothes, so I won't. Can you enter the subway via the Azabu route? She asked Nagata. Lelouch, who had been stuck in the back since the truck pulled itself out of where it crashed, hid behind a large canister, watching as the redhead walked past him, sure that he had seen her somewhere else before. Colin, let's use it here, why not? Nagata asked in return. Because that would mean a bloodbath, the now identified Colin replied back, walking up the stairs of something that was located in the very back of the truck. Outside, Naruto watched as the military started to fire at the truck in earnest, only for the gun to be destroyed, bringing the copter down with it, by something that came out of the back of the truck. That's a /Harken, Naruto realized, recognizing the weapon that was common on all nightmare frames. Looking at the truck, its back opened up, revealing a red nightmare. Taking a closer look, Naruto identified the nightmare as an older model, a Glasgow most likely. You fellas know full well what this badass mother can do. Colin shouted, dodging the fire from the other 2 copters, and fired the /Harkens in retaliation, bringing down a second copter. Right after she knocked down the second copter, another plane appeared, this one different from the others as it carried a nightmare that was noticeably different from Colin's Glasgow, the most notable being that it was mainly a light purple color. The rest of you back off, I will take this guy, the pilot of the new nightmare said, disengaging itself from the plane that was carrying it. I can only assume you dug that obsolete relic out of some scrap heap, the pilot said, deflecting the /Harken Colin launched at him with one of his own. An over-the-hill Glasgow is no match for a Sutherland. He continued twisting his nightmare around once he landed on the street. Not to mention a filthy 11 who spurns the compassion of our glorious emperor. He finished head firing the gun that the Sutherland was carrying and hit the Glasgow's left arm. The pilot was a man in his 20s with chiseled features, neatly combed turquoise hair, and yellow eyes, wearing a blue Royal Guard uniform. Colin, we should both split up. Both of us can't risk being killed. Run for it. Nagata contacted her through a radio link that was built into the Glasgow. But Colin tried to argue, only to be cut off. No. Just get out of here now. Nagata finished saying just as another Sutherland appeared in front of him and opened fire. Inside the second enemy Nightmare was a female pilot with long silver hair that was pulled back in a ponytail with some of it falling on the right side of her face. She had light chocolate brown skin with yellow eyes, and wore a female purple veer. Scion of the Royal Guard uniform that revealed some of her generous bust. Simple-minded 11, she said snidely, watching the truck swerve off onto another road in an attempt to evade the barrage of bullets. Before anything else could happen, the gun that the first Sutherland was carrying was suddenly cut in half before exploding, damaging both of its arms. Well, the hell. The Britannian pilot wondered out loud. You know, her over-the-hill Glasgow is still much better than your defective Sutherland. A male voice neither of the pilots recognized spoke up, drawing their attention. Between the T-Wo Nightmares stood a person wearing a black high-collared cloak with red clouds outlined in white, standard shinobi pants and sandals, though neither of them knew that, black shirt underneath with Anbu vest over it. On his arms he had black fingerless gloves and Anbu arm guards. Over his face he wore a red and black fox mask that hid most of his face from view, but left his mouth exposed. He had blonde spiky hair that fell around the mask with a couple of bangs even falling over it. And, though neither could see it from where they stood, his bright blue eyes could be seen through the eye holes. In his hand was a katana with a crimson blade that almost looked like it was giving off its own light, and a black spiral guard, with a white hilt. Its scabbard was black and hanging across his back. And here is a piece of advice, Britannian: if you're not careful, that arrogance you possess will see you killed. Who the hell do you think you are to be lecturing me? The turquoise pilot growled out. And how were you able to damage my Nightmare? There is no way you managed to do it with that little butter knife. Answering your questions in reverse order, this sword was my mother's and its name is Akashini. And you shouldn't underestimate what it is capable of. Naruto said, holding up the sword with a smirk on his face. As to my name, I'll be keeping that a secret for now. What do you think you're doing? Colin shouted, finally coming out of her shock of seeing the masked blonde suddenly appear in front of them out of nowhere. If you don't get out of here now, you're going to get yourself killed. Naruto looked toward the Glasgow from over his shoulder with a raised eyebrow. Did you not just see me cut that thing's gun in half with just my sword? Naruto asked the crimson hair. Ed pilot, amusement clearly evident in his voice, causing Colin's face to redden slightly in embarrassment. I've already said that you shouldn't underestimate Akashini, but you should also not underestimate me, he finished confidently. Well, here is some advice for you, 11. The enemy Nightmare pilot shouted, the Sutherland's right arm raised and its arm blade extended. Don't take your eyes off your opponent. He finished, bringing the blade down where Naruto was standing. Look out. Colin shouted out a warning to the blonde, trying to fire a slash harken to intercept the blade, but it wouldn't fire. No way, it stuck. She said in a panic, trying to fix the problem before turning her attention back toward the screen, afraid that she would see the masked individual, who, judging by the sound of his voice, was around her age, being crushed by the enemy's blade, only to be surprised again by what she did see. When the enemy brought down their blade, Naruto disappeared for a second, to reappear on the blade and began to run up its arm. Slashing at the Sutherland's arm with his sword, Naruto, putting some of his training to use, and channeled some of his wind chakra into the chalk. Raw conductive blade easily cutting through the Sutherland's arm. In another burst of speed, Naruto disappeared again and reappeared at the Nightmare's feet, slicing at its land spinners, reducing its mobility. Incredible, Colin said in astonishment, as she watched Naruto slice into the Sutherland. He's so fast. And he's cutting through that Nightmare like it was nothing. Shaking off her amaze. Momentarily, Colin lifted up the Glasgow's left arm and fired it at the Sutherland, making sure that Naruto wasn't in the line of fire. When the arm impacted with the Sutherland, it exploded, causing a smokescreen to appear, obstructing the enemy pilot's view. Looking around quickly, Colin tried to find Naruto in the smoke, but couldn't see him anywhere. Not being able to spare any more time looking for the mysterious blonde, Colin sped away from the smokescreen. Damn it, they've escaped. The Sutherland pilot thought furiously. He would have tried to follow after at least the Glasgow, but the damage that the masked blonde had done to his Nightmare, he knew that he wouldn't be able to keep up with it as it escaped. Another time then. Naruto, having left through a leaf Shunshin Rai. After Colin had fired her left arm at the Sutherland, had went off in search of the truck and found that it had crashed again and it was now stuck in one of the old subway tunnels. He could see the door to the back of the truck had been opened and that there were two people standing in front of what Naruto figured was the canister containing the poisonous gas. Taking a closer look, Naruto could see that one of the figures was the black-haired boy from before and that he was talking to a Britannian soldier with brown hair that was about their age. From what he could hear, their names were Lelouch and Suzaku respectively. Naruto's eyes widened in shock when the canister suddenly opened up, but instead of unleashing poisonous gas like he believed it would, a girl in a white jumpsuit and long green hair fell out. The two other boys being just as shocked as he was by the sudden turn of events. Leaving the two boys and girl alone for the moment, Naruto went to check on the driver, Maki. Being sure to stick to the shadows so he wasn't seen by anyone. Taking a look through the window on the driver's side, Naruto let out a silent curse when he noticed that the black-haired driver had a bullet wound in his shoulder and a lot of blood was flowing out. His injury was bad and would need immediate medical attention or else he'd die from possible blood loss. Before Naruto could move to help the injured driver, he caught the sound of several footsteps approaching and a new voice spoke up. "Stinking monkey," a voice called out, some lights now shining on the truck. Taking note of the newcomers, Naruto saw that there were a total of 10 soldiers, including the apparent leader of the group who had spoken up, all their guns trained on three other teens, as no one had seen him having been hidden from view on the other side of the truck. "Being an honorary Britannian will not excuse you. Sir, I was told this was poison gas," Suzaku said, walking up toward his superior. The honorary Britannian's statement only seemed to infuriate his superior, as he began to berate the boy before presenting him with a gun and ordering him to kill Lelouch. Suzaku refused, saying that Lelouch wasn't a terrorist, but a civilian who was unfortunate enough to get caught up in this mess. "Very well," the leader of the squadron said after Suzaku's continuous refusal to shoot his childhood friend. He placed the gun against Suzaku's side and pulled the trigger, causing the boy to fall to the ground. "Suzaku!" Lelouch shouted, watching his friend collapse to the ground. Naruto was about to move in and attack the Britannians when he heard a weak voice come from inside the truck. Turning his attention to the driver, Naruto watched as slowly reached toward something on the dashboard. "Death to Britannia, long live Japan," Nagata said weakly. Naruto's eyes widened in alarm, realizing what the Japanese man was attempting to do, and only just managed to grab onto the driver's shoulder and disappear in another shunshin a second later before the truck exploded. When the two of them reappeared, they were outside, on top of a building a short distance away from where the explosion took place, but out of sight so any planes that passed through the area would be unlikely to see them. As soon as they arrived, Naruto spent the next several minutes applying the little medical jutsu he knew to help heal the wound. After he was sure that the black-haired man wouldn't die from his injury, he finished by dressing the wound in some healing ointment that he always had on him in case of emergencies and some medical tape. A few minutes later, Naruto heard a groan behind him and looked back at the black-haired man that had just regained consciousness. While Naruto waited for the man to wake up, he had kept a lookout for anything that could pose a threat. "I see that you're awake," the blonde shinobi remarked, walking toward the man who was still lying down. "That's good. What's going on? Who are you?" Nagata asked, trying to sit up only to be held down by an arm being placed on his uninjured shoulder. "Easy there, you're safe, but if you move around too much right now you're going to end up reopening your wound," Naruto said gently. "And all you need to know right now about who I am is that I'm a friend. Well, my name is Nagata, and if you saved my life then I owe you my thanks. I was sure I was going to die down there," Nagata admitted, introducing himself to cerulean-eyed boy. "Don't worry about it." Before Naruto could say any more, he was cut off by the sound explosions occurring far away, along with the sound of gunfire and helicopter rotors. "That's coming from the ghetto," Naruto stated worriedly. "What's happening?" Nagata asked him, but didn't try to get up, knowing that with his injuries he'd only make things worse. "I'm not sure," the blonde answered softly before closing his eyes and extending his chakra-sensing capabilities toward where the ghetto was located. What he sensed caused him to clench his fists and grit his teeth. The chakra signatures of the civilians that lived in the ghetto were disappearing at a rapid pace. "The civilians, they're being killed," he finally said. "What? How can you possibly know that?" Nagata questioned him disbelievingly. I'm sorry, I don't have time to explain right now. Naruto replied, performing a single hand seal for his favorite jutsu, Shadow Clone Jutsu. The former Konoha shinobi said, creating 20 shadow clones, gaining a stunned look from Nagata at seeing 20 individuals that looked like exactly his mysterious savior appear out of nowhere. All of you are to save and evacuate as many of the civilians from the ghetto as you can. Now go. Naruto ordered them, getting a quick salute from his clones before they all disappeared. He then created another 2 shadow clones. You two are to stay here and watch over Nagata, understood? Hi boss, they both said at the same time. Turning his attention back toward Naga. Tahi gave the injured man a reassuring smile, don't worry, they'll keep you safe. Naruto told him, walking toward the edge of the building. What are you going to do? The black-haired man questioned him. I'm going to help stop this pointless massacre. The former Jinchuriki answered him before he jumped over the edge, getting a shout of surprise from Nagata, and began while walking down the side of the building. Jumping onto another rooftop, Naruto pulled out his cell phone and called his partner and former tenant, Amami. Naruto said immediately after the other line picked up, where are you right now? He asked her urgently. I'm at the warehouse, Amami answered him. After you told me about your plans of being a more active part of this war, one figured it would be best if I headed here. Good, the blonde shinobi began. It seems that the noble third prince of Britannia has decided to begin a massacre of all the residents of the Shinjuku ghetto. He continued, the word noble dripping with sarcasm. I need you to send Kyuubi to my location. Naruto instructed. Kyuubi? Amami asked him, bewildered. Yeah, can you do it? He questioned her. Of course, I'll send it right away. Amami answered him assuredly. Thanks Amami, you're the best. Naruto finished ending the call. At the warehouse, Amami, wearing the same thing she wore when Naruto saw her in her human form for the first time, looked down at a mostly Crimson Knightmare frame from the control room. The Nightmare framed Kyuubi was a Crimson Knightmare that could transform between its fox form and the normal humanoid Nightmare. It had 9 tails and looked a lot like she did when she was in her own fox form, explaining where it got its name from. There was also hints of black on its feet, shoulders, legs, arms, and chest. Its head was fox-shaped, with the ears pointing back, 3 fangs on each side of its mouth, and solid orange eyes. When in its humanoid form, it stood on its hind legs, with the land spinners being a part of the leg at the back instead of being connected to the side like most Nightmare frames. It had steel claws for hands that could channel chakra and a slash harkens on each arm. Its head remained mainly the same, the only difference being a change in position for the head, and that its mouth as a fox shifts to become the metal piece that covers the lower part of the face of most mechas, making the fangs look more like whiskers. It did lack the normal Nightmare frame's humpback, something both Naruto and Amami agreed was a good thing, but still offered a way to eject if necessary. Well, looks like you finally get a test run. Amami said, a smile on her face, as she typed in some commands on the main computer in the control room. On the floor, Kyuubi, in its fox mode, light U.P signifying that it was on and all systems were operational, and was currently receiving its orders. All right, Amami said, excitedly typing in the last command, prototype Nightmare Frame 009 codename, Kyuubi, launch. With that last signal, Kyuubi shot out of the warehouse and was en route toward where Naruto's signal was located. Show those self-serving Britannians why you shouldn't mess with a fox, Naruto. Amami said to herself, as she began scanning all of Kyuubi's readings and made note of any important information for later. For the last half hour, Naruto had been destroying various tanks and Nightmare frames, making sure that any soldier he knocked unconscious wouldn't wake up for at least a good 4 hours. Afterwards, he would create several shadow clones and instruct them to evacuate any civilians that were in the area. Sadly, Shinjuku was a large area and there were still some casualties. He had just finished knocking out another Britannian soldier when he had to jump to east side in order to dodge a volley of bullets from a Nightmare that had come up from behind him. While he dodged the bullets, the soldier who he had just knocked out ended up being hit. Turning around, he saw the Sutherland positioning its gun to fire again. Hold still, you 11 trash, and accept your death. The pilot from inside the Sutherland said condescendingly. Naruto growled lightly at the sound of the pilot's voice. You just killed one of your comrades, don't you feel any sort of regret for that? He questioned the unknown pilot angrily. Naruto could hear the scoff from the pilot as he replied. Regret. That loser deserved to die if he couldn't even handle a single piece of scum like you. He's nothing but a disgrace to the Empire. The pilot answered Naruto nastily. I see, Naruto poke softly, his eyes hidden by the shadows of his mask making him look more ominous. Then I don't feel any regret for what I'm about to do. With that he lifted his katana, channeling wind chakra into its blade, causing the blade to look like it extended and pierced the nightmare right where the cockpit was located. Sort of like Jin's Shinso from Bleach. Looking down, the pilot saw blood slowly spreading out from his chest. What the hell? The pilot gasped, clutching at the wound on his chest that had suddenly appeared. His eyes wide with fear, shifting to look at the monitor in front of him that now had a hole going straight through it that let some of the light from outside in. How? Naruto didn't answer him. Instead he pulled the blade back slightly, reducing the amount of wind chakra he was channeling into the blade, before swinging the sword, cutting the Sutherland diagonally. Naruto turned away from the falling nightmare, not wanting to waste any more time that he could be using to help the rebels fight the Britannians that were needlessly killing civilians. Out in a different part of the ghetto, a Britannian tank was firing at unarmed 11 civilians only for a SLA. Shish Harken to come out of the ground and pierce into the tank's side, causing it to blow up. The slash Harken then retracted back to a one-armed Glasgow. Those damn Britannians, Colin said with tears in her eyes, not willing to look behind her at the bodies of the Japanese that were surely now lying pools of their own blood. Don't worry, everything is fine. Just concentrate on taking down more enemy units, a voice that she recognized, but didn't know who it really belonged to, said reassuringly from behind her. Turning the Glasgow around quickly, she was once more surprised to see the masked BL own standing behind her and in front of the civilians that seconds ago she was sure had been killed by the tank's gunfire. It's you, Colin murmured in awe, subconsciously noticing that there were bullet holes in the ground right in front of the mysterious blonde. Sorry, but we don't have time to chat right now. We need to focus on leading the civilians out of here, Naruto told her, pointing the civilians towards a different direction that he knew was safe and that he had a few of his clones were keeping guard of. Right. By the way, Naruto began just as he was about to leave, you're doing really well inside that old nightmare model. You must be a truly amazing nightmare pilot. Naruto complimented her. Thanks. Colin just managed to reply before Naruto vanished in a swirl of leaves, a faint red dusting her cheeks. Colin, a male voice came over the radio, can the Glasgow still move? Don't worry Ogi, it's alright, I'll decoy them. Just get the people out of air. The only ones that would be captured are those of us in the resistance, she told him, wiping away the tears from her eyes, setting out to find more Britannian forces. Ogi was a man in his 20s with short black hair that lead their group's resistance ever since Naoto died. I know, but we are trapped, they've got us completely surrounded, Ogi replied dishearteningly. We have to do our best, Colin stated determinedly. I know. But at this rate it's going to take a miracle to get through this, Ogi said, as gunfire could be heard coming from his side of the radio. Colin didn't answer that unsure if it would really take a miracle or if they already had one working with them. Moving down the street helping any survivors escape, Colin fired her slash Harkins at a military copter, making it explode and bringing it down. Hearing something coming from behind her, Colin turned around only to find the two enemy Sutherlands. Well, if it isn't our Glasgow friend, the pilot of the closest Sutherland said. Colin easily recognized the voice as it being the one belonging to the Sutherland pilot she had fought before when she had split up from Nagata. Judging from the lack of battle damage, he had obviously gotten himself a new Sutherland to pilot. Doesn't look like your little mask-wearing friend is here to save you now, so you won't be escaping me this time. He finished firing his assault rifle at her. Colin quickly dodged his, along with his companions, fire and then moved down a nearby narrow street, running away. You won't get far. No one escapes Jeremiah Gottwald for long, the self-introduced Jeremiah shouted, following after the retreating Glasgow. An alarm inside the Glasgow suddenly blared to life, drawing Colin's attention to the control panel that showed that the Glasgow's depleted energy supply. Only 30 minutes left, Colin said in a panicked voice. The west entrance, a new voice said as the radio suddenly cracked to life. Use the tracks to move to the west entrance, the voice said. Who is this? How do you know this code? Colin demanded more than asked. She knew that the voice didn't belong to any of the members in the resistance, and it also didn't seem like the one belonging to the mask-wearing teen. That doesn't matter. If you want to win, then you're just going to have to trust me. In a different part of the ghetto hidden from view was a Sutherland. But unlike all the other Sutherlands that were piloted by Britannian soldiers, the one inside this Sutherland was Lelouch. After the truck had exploded, Lelouch and the green hair girl had managed to escape the Britannian soldiers. Sadly, it didn't last long. When Lelouch and the girl found the exit to the subway tunnel, they found that the soldiers from before had beaten them there and were waiting for them. Having first shot down and killed all the civilians that were hiding inside the old building. Once the soldiers had discovered the two hiding, the leader had fired at Lelouch only for the girl to get in the way and take the bullet to her head. What happened afterwards, Lelouch still wasn't completely sure. All he knew was that he now possessed the power of the king. The power to subject everyone to his rule, and he was going to use that power to make the Empire of Britannia pay. With a single order, he had commanded all the soldiers to kill themselves, which they happily complied to. He had then tricked a silver-haired woman into handing over her nightmare frame, obtaining the Sutherland that he was now piloting. With wide disbelieving eyes, the red-haired girl registered the words spoken to her. To win. Colin mumbled softly. With how things were going, all she had been thinking about was surviving this battle, but the very idea about actually winning had seemed almost impossible to her. The only chance they seemed to have of actually coming out ahead in this had been the sudden appearance of the fox mask-wearing teen, but here was someone else that was also promising them a chance at victory, and Colin couldn't almost believe it. Without many other options, she did as she was instructed. The Glasgow leapt onto the overhead bridge and hooked its land spinners onto the track. Okay, what am I supposed to do now? She asked, as she glanced behind her, noticing that the two Sutherlands were right behind her. Colin let out a light gasp when she looked back in front of her and saw a train speeding towards her. Since you trusted me, you are going to win. Jump onto the train, Lelouch instructed her over the radio. Gotcha, she replied, making the Glasgow leapt onto the train and continues to the carriages. Due to the fact that he had been following so close behind her, Jeremiah was forced to use his Sutherland to stop the train from advancing further. If that's your plan, you go after the Glasgow, Jeremiah ordered his subordinate, keeping the train in place. Yes, my lord, the nameless Sutherland pilot answered, jumping into the air, but was shot by two Harkins, one hitting the Sutherland's midsection, the other knocking off its head. Jeremiah turned his gaze toward where the Harkins had come from, only to see that they had been fired by a fellow Sutherland. What the? Shot by friendly fire. What's your name and your unit? Jeremiah demanded angrily. We are after the one-armed Glasgow, he continued, but was cut off when he unknown Sutherland started fire at him. Oh my God, a terrorist. Jeremiah shouted fearfully. He started to retreat, but one of the bullets hit the Sutherland's leg, destroying it, making the Sutherland fall to its knees. Pulling out his Nightmare's assault rifle and was about to fire at the rogue Sutherland when out of the corner of his eye he saw that the red Glasgow was charging at him. With no clear chance of winning now, the turquoise pilot ejected out of his Nightmare, the pod firing off into the distance. You saved me, but how did you get a hold of a Sutherland, huh? Colin went to ask after watching the parachute for the pod deploy, but stopped mid-sentence when she noticed that the rogue Sutherland had disappeared. What? Where did he go? Colin. The familiar voice of OHG. I shouted, looking around. She saw that her friends and fellow resistance members had arrived, all of them keeping a lookout for enemies. What the hell was that radio message earlier? Ogi asked her. What? He contacted you too? She asked them in turn. Sure did, and Yoshida's group should be here soon, Ogi said, finishing just as his radio crackled to life. Are you in charge? The mysterious voice asked through Ogi's radio. Grabbing his radio, Ogi answered uncertainly, yeah. I present to you the cargo in that train over there. They're tools for your victory. If you want to use them to win, then follow my orders. Lelouch told them seriously. Using the Glasgow to open one of the train's compartment, Colin stared with wide eyes at the compartment filled with Sutherlands, and by the sounds of it the other compartments held the same thing. Woman in the Glasgow, Lelouch began. Yes. The red-haired pilot answered after a second. Stay where you are, your unit is going to run decoy, got that? Understood. She replied. Energy filler's status? He questioned. About 15 minutes worth is left, Colin answered him. Then recharge it. In 10 minutes I'll contact you with your next instructions. Lelouch finished giving his last orders to the redhead before he cut the connection with her. Naruto stared at the scene in front of him in slight amazement. In the last 15 meters. Minutes or so the resistance fighters had been able to completely change the tide of the battle. He could obviously tell by the fact that they were far more organized now that something had changed, and that they were now being led by someone new. What amazed him was the fact that this person was at the very least a decent tactician to be able to predict the enemy's movements. Suddenly Naruto blinked, as memories from a recently dispelled shadow clone told him that Kyuubi had arrived. Standing from where he was watching everything unfold, the blonde shinobi headed in the direction that Kyuubi was located. When he reached where Kyuubi was waiting, still in its fox mode, Naruto noticed that there were a few Sutherland encircling the Crimson Fox Knightmare. He couldn't tell whether they were Britannian soldiers or rebel forces. But either way he had to get to his nightmare. Moving at speeds that were impossible for anyone else, besides Amami, to move it without the use of a vehicle. Naruto sped past the Sutherlands and jumped onto the Kyuubi's back, entering the cockpit that was located there. Naruto had barely settled himself inside the cockpit and taken the controls when the surrounding Sutherlands had opened fire on him. He was never more glad than now that the armor-coating Kyuubi was stronger than the steel used for most nightmares and that it didn't make Kyuubi all that heavier. Whoever they were, they obviously didn't think he was on their side. Grunting slightly from the shock of the impacting bullets, Naruto flipped a switch on the controls, bringing the Kyuubi's tails to life. As a blade extended out of each tail, moving in front of him widely, the tails began to deflect the bullets that were heading his way. It was something that Amami and him had worked together to create. Using sensors to detect the incoming projectiles, the tails would move to block or deflect any bullets and slash Harkins that were shot at him. It was supposed to be the Nightmare's ultimate defense against projectiles. Letting out another groan from another bullet hitting Kyuubi, Naruto realized that while the tails were deflecting most of the bullets, they were moving a bit slower than anticipated, and some of the bullets were still making their way through the automatic defense, making Kyuubi jump off to the side to get out of the line of fire. Naruto was at least satisfied with its response time. It seemed to react more to his thoughts rather than the controls in his hands. Now that he had a couple of seconds away from the continuous barrage, Naruto took count of the number of opponents he was facing. There were 2 straight in front of him, the IFF showed that there were 3 more behind him, and 1 off to the side. Deciding on a plan of action, Naruto rushed forward to the 2 Sutherlands in front of him. Kyuubi moved faster than they had expected, catching them off guard, and in an instant Naruto was on them. Jumping up, Kyuubi opened its mouth, revealing an assortment of harp-looking fangs that quickly bit onto one of the Sutherlands, head tearing it off. At the same time, Naruto swung Kyuubi around. 2 of the bladed tails extended it, cut off the other Sutherland's head and legs, leaving it in 3 separate pieces. The remaining 4 Sutherlands immediately started to fire at the Crimson Knightmare, and once again Kyuubi's tails came to life, blocking most of the bullets with a few getting through. Refusing to just sit still and be attacked, Naruto charged at the lone Sutherland. The one Sutherland reacted better than the other 2 from before, having been better prepared for Kyuubi's unnatural speed, and had immediately started to back up from the approaching Fox Knightmare, not once letting up from his fire. Naruto started to channel his chakra into Kyuubi, roughed the controls in his hands and sent it toward the Nightmare's clawed hands, making them a faint blue. Moving in closer with a quick burst of speed, the blonde pilot extended Kyuubi's left arm out. Its claws pointed straight at the enemy Sutherland. In a moment of panic, the Sutherland pilot hit the ejection button, fearing that the claws had been heading for the cockpit. Without someone piloting it, the Sutherland began to fall to the ground, but not before it received some vicious claw marks to its chest. Looking toward the remaining 3 Sutherlands, Naruto noticed that they were moving towards him. Apparently they decided to take the fight to him, and were moving in a triangle formation. Naruto let them move in closer before he did anything. Once he felt that they were close enough, Naruto To hit another switch on the controls and Kyuubi started to transform from its fox mode to its humanoid one, the three Sutherlands slowing down to watch the transformation take place. When the transformation ended, Kyuubi now stood proudly on its back legs, its tail swishing behind it almost lazily, especially compared to wild movements from before. Throwing his left arm forward, Naruto fired a slash Harken at one of the Sutherlands, taking it by surprise, but it moved just enough so the slash Harken had just managed to graze its arm, causing sparks to appear. Twisting the arm around, Naruto made he slash Harken change directions so that it encircled the Sutherland, keeping it in place. Lifting up Kyuubi's right arm, Naruto fired the other slash Harken that was located there, severing the Sutherland's head from its body before retracting both lines. The second Sutherland had in the meantime moved in close with its arm blade extended, hoping to tear into the fox at close range. Sadly, for him, Naruto moved one of the tails to intercept his blade with its own. Blocking something was a lot more difficult than deflecting a projectile and required Naruto to do it himself. The Sutherland stood still for a second, as its pilot processed the fact that his attack had been stopped. But that 1 second was all it took, as the other tails smashed into the unmoving Sutherland, knocking it a good distance away. The final Sutherland, stricken with fear by the fact that a single enemy unit had been able to defeat 5 Sutherlands, almost instantly began firing at the Kyuubi without pause, but none of he bullets hit, since Naruto had Kyuubi jump into the air to avoid the barrage of fire. Naruto twisted Kyuubi midair, so that it was parallel with the Sutherland beneath him before the tails surged forward, cutting into the Sutherland and leaving nothing but pieces in the wake. Letting out a sigh, Naruto closed his eyes, the red of the Sharingan disappearing as he did so, having turned on the Dujutsu for that last maneuver to make sure he didn't accidentally kill the pilot inside. "Well, all things considered, not bad for a first battle," Naruto muttered to himself. "Is that so?" Amami's voice said. One of the monitors showing that a communications link had been established between the Nightmare Kyuubi and the real thing back at the warehouse. "So I'm guessing that it's working perfectly," she finished. "More or less," Naruto answered her with a large grin. "A few adjustment here and there and I think we will be able to continue with its testing." "That's good to hear," the red-haired vixen stated. "Yeah, now if you would excuse me, I have a few more Britannian asses to kick today," the blue-eyed boy said cheerfully. "Sure thing, have fun," Amami replied with just as much amusement before she ended the communication. With a large grin on his face, Naruto shifted Kyuubi back into its fox form, it being faster when it was in that mode, and headed toward where the IFF indicated that a large group of Sutherlands had gathered. It was all going according to his plan. Every move that the enemy made, he already had something ready to counter it. If his half-brother was anything, then it was predictable, Lelouch thought confidently. Of course not everything was going according to his plan. He had noticed that a few enemy Sutherlands were being destroyed that had nothing to do with the resistance group that he was leading. But he put it off as merely other rebels doing what they could. He had also been worried when a small group of 6 Sutherlands had separated from the large group, considering the possibility that they might have discovered the trap he was setting. His worry lessened slightly when he noticed that they were headed towards an unidentified nightmare frame and figured that they were just being used to back up a new reinforcement. He then put it out of his thoughts completely when the 6 Sutherlands were destroyed by the unknown nightmare. Besides, he had to focus his attention to what was happening right in front of him, because with this last move it would check. Lelouch was so busy imagining his victory that he was caught completely off guard when all the enemy units were suddenly destroyed. If he had been paying attention and traced the pattern which the Sutherlands were destroyed, he would have noticed that it created a spiral. "What the hell?" Lelouch said out loud before grabbing his radio. "Q1, have you deployed the trap?" he questioned. "No, I'm still waiting for the signal," Colin's voice answered from the other end. "Then what the hell happened?" Lelouch muttered to himself. Turning his attention to IFF screen, he noticed that in the middle of the destroyed Sutherlands now stood the unidentified nightmare from before. Impossible, the black-haired boy thought. A single nightmare should not have been able to take all those Sutherlands out of commission in such a short amount of time. Moving his Sutherland carefully, Lelouch walked toward where the trap waited to be deployed. There, standing in the midst of a whole bunch of rubble that was once Britannian Sutherland, stood, it being in its human mode again, a single red nightmare frame. He almost thought it was the Glasgow, but a couple of things stood out that made that theory impossible. For one, it had both its arms, and secondly, it had 9 tails moving behind it. What the hell is that thing? I've never seen anything like it before. In a different part of the ghetto, one of the rebels was keeping a lookout for any more enemy units when the pilot inside saw something. Huh, what is that? A short-cut dark brown-haired man asked himself, noticing that a new nightmare had suddenly appeared and was heading in his direction. The new nightmare was mostly white with gold accents on different parts of its body and a red jewel at the center of its chest, and had solid green eyes. It doesn't look like a Sutherland. He didn't even get to finish his observation before he was taken down. Back with Lelouch, he was watching the Crimson Knightmare trying to decide what the next best course of action was when one of the resistance members' voice suddenly came from the radio he had in his hand. This is B Group. Reporting enemy presence. Reinforcements. Real battle is different, isn't it? Lelouch asked, no one in particular bringing up the radio to his ear. Status. Everyone ejected. But they took out 4 units in nothing flat. The voice answered anxiously. Enemy numbers. Lelouch continued to ask. Just 1. I think it's a new model. Never seen anything like. Ah. The resistance pilot replied, but the connection was destroyed before he could finish. What's happening out there? The violet-eyed boy demanded, but didn't receive an immediate answer. A decoy. He wondered, turning his attention back toward the Crimson Knightmare he could still see. Q1, do it now. Lelouch ordered, signaling Colin to use the trap they set. From underground, Colin read the Glasgow/Harkin at the ceiling of old abandoned tunnel, destabilizing the ground above where Naruto was standing. The wide smile he was wearing at the thought of crushing the enemy unit suddenly disappeared when the Fox Nightmare jumped away from the area that was crumbling down, covering more distance in a single jump than should have been possible for a nightmare frame, and keeping it safe from harm. Impossible, Lelouch murmured disbelievingly. For the next few minutes Lelouch relayed orders towards his forces, the Crimson Knightmare having disappeared after the failed trap. Omething Lelouch was thankful for, since he doubted he'd be able to handle 2 opponents with the amount of trouble he was currently having with one. But no matter what his plan was, the unknown Nightmare was able to outperform the resistance fighters and destroying the Sutherlands he had gifted with in the process. From what he was able to gather from the little information that the rebel forces were able to witness before they were destroyed, the new Nightmare was designed for close combat and was able to reflect bullets. The last standing rebel group had just fallen when Lelouch saw a white Nightmare suddenly appear in the hole of the building he was hiding in. The black-haired student had barely managed to lift the Sutherland's arms up in a defensive position when the white Nightmare struck him with a punch. You mean that this thing is what's been ruining my plan? Lelouch asked out loud. Nothing more than a pilot, how dare he? He said angrily before the floor gave out beneath him from the combined pressure the 2 nightmares were excreting. Dropping a couple of floors, Lelouch watched as the white Nightmare dove down at him, its fists raised to strike, only for it to be stopped by the one-armed Glasgow. Hey, I'm returning the favor, Colin said, holding the white Nightmare back. Lelouch, using the opportunity that presented itself, escaped, leaving the other 2 behind. He had something more important to attend to after all. Colin was holding the white Nightmare back for as long as she could. She had even fired a /Harkin at the thing, but it had been easily caught. But she knew that she was being quickly overpowered by the new opponent. She was just about to eject, hoping that she bought whoever was helping enough time to get away, when a fist suddenly slammed into the white Nightmare, forcing it to let go and knocking it through a wall and out of the building. There, standing before, was a Crimson Knightmare with fox attributes and 9 tails that were almost motionless. Hey, are you alright? A voice she recognized, having heard it twice before, asked with concern from the Fox Nightmare. Yeah, Colin replied in a daze, thanks for saving me. Don't mention it, Naruto said dismissively. Listen, take this chance and get out of here. I'll hold that thing off. What? Colin said incredulously, you can't fight that thing on your own. She argued. Naruto let out a sigh before replying, your Glasgow is in no condition to continue fighting. Besides, haven't we already been over this? You shouldn't underestimate me. But, Colin began, T knew that he had a point. The Glasgow was on its last leg and wouldn't last long at this rate. And he had already done a few amazing things before. She'd just have to put her faith in that he would be able to do it again. Fine. But you better make it out of this. The red-headed pilot relented before leaving in a different direction than the one the White Nightmare was thrown toward. If I didn't know any better, I would have sworn she was worried about me. Naruto mused to himself before leaping through the hole that the White Nightmare had created. Outside, the White Nightmare was just picking itself up. Inside, piloting the nightmare, was none other than Suzaku. After being knocked out from his wound, he had woken up in the medical bay near the Prince Clovis transporter. His life had been spared thanks to a broken watch that he kept with him. When he woke up, he met a short silver-haired man and his blue-haired female assistant, and was offered the opportunity to pilot a new nightmare frame called the Lancelot. At first he had been unsure, but he eventually agreed as he saw it as the perfect opportunity to end all this senseless fighting. "Are you another terrorist?" Suzaku asked over the Lancelot's loudspeakers. Inside Kyuubi, Naruto smiled at the question. "Terrorist, hero of justice. It all depends on how you look at it and who you ask. I, for example, only have one wish, and that's to help everyone who needs it, no matter what anyone else thinks." "I don't understand," Suzaku began. "If you want to help everyone, why would you agree to all this pointless murder? If you want to help, then join the military and change how things are run from the inside." "Pointless murder," Naruto muttered. "Funny you should say that when you're working for the one who ordered the massacre of everyone living in the Shinjuku ghetto without caring who it was. You say to change things from the inside, but that is not always possible. People will oppose the change you're trying to make happen, and then the people who you wanted to help are left suffering, as they wait for something that might not happen." Naruto told him, "I understand that sometimes you have to work with those you don't want to. But if I always conform to their decisions, then I can't do everything I know I can. I'm fighting you right now for the ones who are depending on to give them a better future." Naruto finished, as he charged at him, an action that was copied by the Lancelot. They meet when they were halfway between each other and started to trade blows. Suzaku activated the Lancelot's slash Harken but didn't fire them, instead using them more like wrist blades. Naruto countered by using Kyuubi's clawed hands or its bladed tails, which he had reactivated. Aiming for the Fox Nightmare's head, Suzaku attacked it swiftly with the Lancelot's bladed hands, only to have the Kyuubi move its head out of the way every time, making him miss. One of Kyuubi's tails rushed forward, but was blocked by the Lancelot's bladed hands. Though because of all the force that the tail carried behind it, it pushed the Lancelot backwards into the air. Using the distance between them to his advantage, Suzaku fired he slash Harkens at the Crimson Knightmare. The slash Harkens came close to hitting him, but Naruto was able to deflect them by using Kyuubi's tails. Naruto fired his own slash Harkens in retaliation, but Suzaku spun the Lancelot out of the way of the incoming projectiles. Not letting up for a second, Naruto rushed forward toward where the Lancelot was falling, throwing a punch along the way, only to have it countered by a punch from Lancelot, the collision causing the ground they were standing on to crater. Suzaku then attacked with a kick, but Naruto ducked under it and managed to grab the Lancelot's outstretched kick with one of Kyuubi's tails. Using the hold he had on the Lancelot, Naruto threw the White Nightmare up into the air and fired his slash Harkens at it, only to have them blocked by Lancelot's own. For the next 2 minutes neither pilot let up, fighting each other all out, as they moved through the ghetto. Neither of them had the upper hand, as whatever one tried the other was able to counter it. That is of course to say any blow one landed the other would land one of their own soon after. They had just passed a building when it started to crumble and 2 people fell out of it, a mother and her young child. The 2 pilots saw the 2 civilians falling and immediately put their fight on hold in order to save them. Though Lancelot was closer to the falling pair, Kyuubi easily passed him. Having shifted into its fox mode, before jumping into the air and changing mid-jump back to its human form, and caught the 2. With all the debris that was falling, the dust that was CKED up hid the Kyuubi and the 2 civilians from view. Naruto used the dust cloud to escape. He would have continued his battle with the White Nightmare, but his priority had changed to making sure that the woman and her child were safe. A short while later, Naruto stopped and put the woman and her child down. "Listen," Naruto spoke soothingly, "head in that direction and you'll find other civilians hiding out in a shelter that will keep you safe until this is all over." Naruto instructed, pointing her in the direction she should be heading. Thank you," the woman said hesitantly before sprinting off in the direction Naruto indicated. Naruto watched her run off with a smile before he headed in the opposite direction to draw attention away from where she was going. After the mask Ring team told her to escape. Colin had left running toward the rendezvous point, being forced to abandon the Glasgow because of all the damage it had suffered. Colin, Ogi shouted behind her from a warehouse she had just passed. Stopping, she turned around and joined her friend entering the warehouse, which she noticed was filled with other survivors along with members of the resistance. Ogi, who is that voice we heard? She asked her friend, thinking about the one mystery they both knew about. Damn if I know. He doesn't answer when I call, so maybe he began but was interrupted when the front warehouse was suddenly blown down. Through the newly made hole a tank appeared, followed by a bunch of Britannian soldiers all carrying guns. See, I told you, instead of following someone we don't even know. We should have used the poisoned gas. Damn Nagata to hell, the brown-haired man that was first taken out, who was named Tamaki, complained. So this is where you 11's vermin scurried off to. The tank commander said, looking down all the survivors from his place on the tank. Prepare to fire, he ordered, causing the soldiers to train their weapons on the civilians and resistance members. Seeing all the guns pointed in her direction, Colin closed her eyes in fear. Naoto. She whispered quietly. The room was suddenly filled with a loud thunk, as the cannon on the tank fell off, followed a lot of thuds. As the soldiers and the commander fell over unconscious. Opening her eyes, Colin stared in amazement at the destroyed cannon piece that was cut cleanly through. She was just beginning to guess what had happened when her friends started to voice their confusion. What the hell just happened? Tamaki asked angrily, staring at the fallen over soldiers, expecting them to stand back up and fire at any moment. You know, a voice that only Colin recognized began, this is the third time I've come to your rescue. There, sitting on the ruined cannon, was the masked blonde red teen, looking at Colin specifically. I wonder if this is what they call a destined meeting. He finished amusedly. What? Colin questioned, her face going slightly red. Who the hell are you? Tamaki demanded, pointing his gun at the teen. Naruto shifted his attention, the brown-haired male not at all worried about the gun pointed at him. You're a bit of a hothead, aren't you? Naruto asked rhetorically. What did you do? Tamaki began, but was cut off when Naruto jumped off his perch from on the tank and began speaking toward everyone. Now, is anyone in need of medical aid? Naruto asked, but no one in the warehouse was injured. Well, that's good to hear. He commented. All right, who are you? Ogi said, stepping in. Are you the voice from the radio? He asked him. Voice from the radio? Naruto replied confusedly. I'm afraid I have no idea what you're talking about. He admitted honestly. Then who are you? Ogi questioned. I'm a friend. Naruto answered simply. A friend? You've got to be kidding me. It's obvious that this guy is some type of Britannian spy that's trying to get our guard down. Tamaki intervened. That's not true, Colin protested, coming to Blonde's defense. He's been helping me since the very beginning. He saved a few civilians that were about to be killed, and helped me escape from that white nightmare. And in case you've forgotten, Tamaki, he just saved all our lives. Why would he need to catch us off guard when we were already finished? That is. Tamaki began, trying to come up with something to explain the blonde's actions. You're not really trusting, are you? And here I even brought you all a gift. Naruto said, intentionally leaving what the gift was unsaid to make them more curious. Gift? What gift? Colin asked him. Well, technically I'm returning something back to you. Naruto said with a fox-like grin on his face, which went really well with his mask. Letting out a whistle as the signal, Naruto stepped to the side. As a couple of clones walked into the warehouse carrying Nagata, who was lying down on a medical cot. Nagata! All the members of the resistance shouted, rushing toward their injured friend. Hey guys! I'm glad to see you're all alright. Nagata said with as much enthusiasm as he could manage. But how? Colin asked. I heard an explosion. I thought you had. She left the last part unsaid. Yeah, I almost did, Nagata admitted. But this guy was able to save me somehow. He said, pointing toward the mask-wearing blonde. Walking toward the blonde, Colin and Ogi wore grateful smiles, as they looked toward the blonde. Thank you for helping our friend. Ogi began. Yeah, we really appreciate it, Colin continued. Looking closer at the blonde, her eyes widened when she noticed something strange about his eyes. They were blood red and had 3 black tones in each one. Your eyes, the redhead said, surprised. Naruto looked at the girl in confusion for a second before he realized what she was talking about. Oh yeah, it's just a little trick I know to help hide my actual eye color. He lied smoothly. Oh, Colin muttered quietly, though now she couldn't help but wonder what his real eyes looked like. Attention all forces, cease fire at once. I, Clovis III Prince of Britannia and Royal Viceroy of Area 11 hereby command you. The voice of the third prince sounded over some loudspeakers. All forces are ordered to cease fire at once. You will also cease destruction of any buildings or property. All casualties, whether Britannian or 11, shall be treated equally and without prejudice. In the name of Clovis La Britannia, you are hereby ordered. Cease fire at once. I shall allow no further fighting. Clovis finished giving his orders. So what, just like that it's over? Ogi questioned disbelievingly. I wonder, Naruto began drawing everyone's attention. I wonder if the military will be mad that I knocked all these soldiers out. Naruto said, indicating toward the Britannian soldiers that were still lying passed out on the ground. How did you do that anyway? Ogi questioned him. 1 second they're about to fire and the next they're out cold. Oh that, I just happened to be very fast. Naruto replied, giving Ogi an answer without revealing anything. Anyway, I should be going now that things are over. Take care. He finished, turning away from them dismissing his clones after they had put Nagata down, making more questions appear in the minds of everyone there. Wait, you're just going to leave without even telling us who you are? Colin questioned him. Quote, I told you I'm a friend and for right now that is all I can tell you. Naruto replied, looking back at them. He suddenly stopped when he finally noticed the headbands that they were all wearing. What is it? Colin asked him after he just stood there staring for a minute. It's noting, Naruto said, shaking his head, it's just that your headbands reminded me of someone. Goodbye. And with that farewell, the masked team disappeared in a leaf shunshin. The Namikaze Corporation building was a tall structure, towering over most of the buildings surrounding it. The first thing that anyone who walked into the building for the first time would notice was the grand water fountain built in the middle of the lobby, and most importantly the marble statue built over it of a man with spiky hair, a.w. Oman with long hair that framed her face with a hair clip, and between them, in the woman's arms, was a cloth-covered baby. None of the employees or the company's visitors knew who the 2 individuals were. But they correctly assumed that they were the young owner's deceased parents. The next thing that would be taken note of was the fact that both Britannians and 11s were working peacefully with one another within the building. Inside his office, near the top of the building, Naruto was working on some of the endless amounts of paperwork that he had to deal with on a daily basis. It was the day after the battle at Shinjuku Ghetto and Naruto was working on plans to help with its reconstruction after all damage it suffered. Walking into the room in her fox form, using her tails to open the door, Amami let out a sigh once she noticed that her partner was still at his desk working, where he had been since he arrived late last night. What do you think you're doing? She asked him. Working. Naruto replied without looking up from the papers on his desk. There is still a lot for me to do if I want to make sure Shinjuku gets rebuilt properly. What about school? Amami questioned him, as she jumped onto his desk. What about it? Naruto replied, finally looking up from the paperwork on his desk to stare at the red-furred vixen curiously. You haven't gone a single day since the start of the term. Amami pointed out. A few months ago she had finally been able to convince Naruto to attend Ashford Academy, but the boy had put off from actually going to school for one reason or another. What's the point of going to school when I'm the owner of a very successful company? The former Konoha shinobi asked her, besides, weren't you the one telling me yesterday that I needed to be or responsible with managing the company? I never said you weren't responsible, the small vixen stated with a sigh, and the point of going is so that you can actually meet and interact with people your own age. Even Tsunade said you should try and make some friends here in that last letter we received. I still have a lot of work to do, especially with the Shinjuku project, and making sure the plans aren't blocked by some Britannian government official. Naruto reasoned. That's what shadow clones are for. Amami countered, there is nothing that you can do that they can't. Naruto read to think of something refute Amami's claim, But the shadow clones only had two weaknesses, one being the fact that they go up in smoke after one hit, which with the fact that they would be used to deal with paperwork and other trivial tasks wouldn't be that big of a problem. The other was that the shadow clones would need a lot of chakra, and with his chakra in addition to Amami's it wasn't an issue either. Fine, I'll go, he said, sighing in defeat. That a boy. You see, things are so much easier when you just listen to me. The Kyuubi no Kitsune said smugly, as her single crimson tail swayed elegantly behind her. Now go get ready for your first day, she told him, using her tail to point towards a private elevator located in Naruto's office. Naruto's office was the only office located on that floor, with a waiting area with couches and a TV that lead to it, but the floor above his office also acted as his home, with a living room, kitchen and dining room, restroom, and 3 bedrooms, one for him, another for Amami, and the last one for any guest that stays over, if they ever had a guest, each with its own private bathroom. There was only 2 ways to get to the floor above. On E was the private elevator located in Naruto's office, which required Naruto to channel chakra into the button to go up. The other was the public elevator, but it also needed chakra to work, or Naruto needed to grant permission for someone to visit. As extra security, there were seals placed around the 2 floors, along with the rest of the building, which kept it safe from being destroyed by attacks both outside and inside the building. Yeah, Naruto muttered, annoyed, as he stood from his desk and made his way toward the private elevator. Damn troublesome fur ball. I heard that, Amami shouted, following after him. In Ashford Academy, Lelouch Lamperouge walked down one of the school's hallways towards his class, alongside some of his friends and fellow student council members. As he contemplated the events of the other day, first and foremost was him meeting the mysterious girl with green hair and the power he obtained from her. After that, it was his commanding of the terrorists and the nearly flawless victory over the Britannian forces. It would have been flawless if it hadn't been for the appearance of the White Nightmare frame. When he managed to escape from the unknown nightmare with the help of the woman in the Glasgow, he immediately went to confront his half-brother Clovis and learn about the events that led up to his mother's, Marianne, death before killing him. He was brought out of his recollection of the other day when he stepped into his classroom to hear some of the other students talking about Shinjuku. Most of the information being broadcasted was tedious and totally inaccurate, with the government blaming the Japanese terrorists for all the deaths that occurred in Shinjuku with the use of poison gas. What he couldn't understand is what they were trying to accomplish by hiding the fact that Third Prince Clovis had been killed. Was it just to starve off anarchy? Remembering that he had killed someone caused Lelouch's stomach to churn, forcibly forcing him excuse to himself to go to the restroom. When Lelouch finally made it back, class was about to start, but what had his attention was the group of 4 girls surrounding a 5th girl, asking the 5th girl a few questions, who hadn't been there when he had left earlier. It took him a couple of seconds, but Lelouch eventually recognized her as the girl from yesterday who was piloting the Glasgow. Of course, that's why she is so familiar, Lelouch realized, as he made his way to his seat at the table behind where Colin was sitting. What's up, buddy? See something you like? Rivals questioned, coming up behind his black-haired friend. You got a thing for her, don't cha? He stated more than asked, unknowingly getting the attention of a girl with long orange hair that was sitting close by. Just thinking this is a rare event, Lelouch replied calmly, not bothered by his friend's questions. She hasn't been here at school since this whole term started, the black-haired boy pointed out. Though Rivals didn't look all that convinced by his Lelouch's answer. Colin Statfeld, they say she is sick or something and she barely showed up at school last year either. Still, her grades are at the top of the class and she is a member of the Statfeld family, which means she is well-bred and rolling in money. Man, you sure know how to pick them, Rivals said, telling the lead-eyed boy beside him all that he knew about their classmate, and teasing him a bit at the end. It's not like that, Lelouch argued passively. You don't have to hide it, a touch too sheltered if you ask me. The short blue-haired boy finished just as their teacher walked into the room. All right, everyone, to your seats. I have one quick announcement before we start class, a nondescriptive man in a suit and short brown hair said, as he stood at the front of the room behind the desk. At once all the students complied with their teacher's instruction and sat in their respective seats, getting a nod of the head from their teacher at their quick compliance to his order. Very well, like I said, I have quick announcement before we officially start class. Today a new student will be joining. As I hope you all make him feel welcomed. The teacher said, though if any of the students had paid close enough attention they would have noticed the discontented look he carried, and how his voice was just a bit more strained than usual. Looking toward the door at the front of the room, the teacher continued, "You may come in now," he directed. The door opened smoothly, as the person on the other side calmly entered the room and made his way to stand by the teacher's desk. His physical appearance had many of the girls in the room blushing while the boys stared at him with looks of either interest or jealousy at the affect he was having on the females in the class. He stood at 6 feet 2 with shoulder-length spiky golden blonde hair that framed his handsome face, which carried a small carefree smile that instantly put everyone at ease. His sky-blue eyes seemed to entrance everyone in the room, as none of them had ever seen a pair of eyes that shade of blue. He also had 3 whisker marks on each of his cheeks that the girls thought, along with his slightly tanned skin, gave him sort of an exotic look. His body was lean, but with clearly defined muscles that gave him the appearance of someone who cared about physical fitness, but wasn't obsessed over it. The next thing that everyone noticed was that his school uniform was slightly different than the standard academy uniform for boys. For one, the blazer and the white button-up shirt were left open, allowing everyone to see the black t-shirt he wore underneath, and the green gem necklace he was wearing. The other difference was the standard yellow, gold-colored accents were actually a bright orange. "Hello everyone," the blonde-haired teen began, drawing everyone out of their silent observations. "It's nice to meet you all. My name is Naruto Uzumaki," he said in a rich baritone that almost hypnotized all those who heard it, especially the young women as they started to blush a darker shade of red just from the sound of his voice, until they registered what his name was. Instantly the whispering of the class began, as they all tried to figure out what the teen with the Japanese-sounding name was doing there. A very EU came to correct conclusion and figured out that he was most likely half Britannian and half Japanese, or at the very least an honorary Britannian. Colin looked around at her classmates with barely disguised loathing at what some of them were starting to say about the blonde-haired boy. Not even a minute ago a majority of them seemed to be completely enthralled by him, and now they were openly talking about him as if he were beneath them. She even noticed that the teacher seemed to be almost happy by the not-so-whispered comments that were being thrown at the new student. Really, was it any wonder why she hated Britannia so much? They cared for no one but themselves and didn't care about who they hurt just because they were different from them. Part of the reason that she kept her own image so very well hidden was because she knew how much trouble the information would cause her if it ever became public knowledge. The trouble this guy had unintentionally given himself. Focusing her attention back to the boy in the front of the class, she was surprised by what she saw. She had expected him to be angry or upset, maybe even a little bit sad, by what was being said, but instead Colin found that the boy didn't seem bothered by the comments at all. Instead, he still wore that same smile he had on when he first entered the room. His eyes hadn't dulled in the least bit and were still that same shade of brilliant sky blue. In fact, he seemed to be staring directly at her, making her blush just the smallest of bit, in wonder and the slightest bit of recognition. Which was both strange and concerning. Strange because she was sure that she had never met the boy before, and concerned because if he recognized her it might mean that he had seen her before helping out the resistance. She seriously hoped that wasn't the case. Lelouch was also staring at the boy in slight wonder. It wasn't every day that they got a new classmate, especially one that was half Britannian. What drew Hi's curiosity the most was how his new classmate didn't seem to be at all bothered by the comments that were being made, which had escalated to the point of being badly veiled insults, and that the her wasn't doing a single thing to discourage. This guy either honestly didn't care what others said about him or he was an idiot. Whichever way it was, that was as far as Lelouch's curiosity concerning the new student went. After all, it wasn't like he was someone important that he had to concern himself with. No, right now he needed to focus on getting as much information out of Colin as possible, and as soon as possible. Naruto watched everyone in the class with a hint of amusement. Walking into the classroom, he already had a good idea of how they would react to his name, and he wasn't disappointed when the whispers started. He wasn't all that bothered by the things they said or the looks they were giving him. After his childhood in Konoha, this was hardly anything. But there were two people in the room that drew his attention. One of them was a black-haired boy. It took Naruto a couple of minutes to realize where he recognized the dark-haired teen before he remembered that he was one of the boys he had seen the other day in the tunnels. With everything that happened yesterday, the explosion, fighting Britannian soldiers, the Kyuubi's debut, and the White Nightmare, it was easy for Naruto to forget about him and the other two. But it looked like he was fine, so Naruto could only hope that the brown-haired teen, Suzaku, and the mysterious green-haired girl were as well. The second person that drew Naruto's attention was a girl with shoulder-length dark red hair and ocean blue eyes, who wore the standard academy uniform for girls, a yellow blazer, black skirt, and a short green tie. Her hairstyle might be different, but Naruto was sure that she was the same girl he had met yesterday who was piloting the Glasgow. Naruto wondered why she was there, but it wasn't the foremost thought in his mind. Yesterday when he had seen the resistance members' headbands, he had been reminded of Naoto and the fact that he wore one exactly like theirs, and now here today with her hair str. Down, Naruto noticed the similarities between the two redheads, and could only come to the conclusion that this beautiful girl was the sister that Naoto mentioned to him 3 years ago. Of course, if this was in fact true or not would have to wait for the moment, as he still had a few things to say towards his new classmates. As most of you have already figured out from my name, Naruto Bega. Focusing the students' undivided attention back on him, I am half Britannian and half Japanese. He stated, confirming their thoughts, without any hesitation, getting some surprised looks from his classmates at how easily he just said that. Some of you might refer to me as a half-blood, though personally I prefer half-breed, sounds cooler. Naruto continued, smile still in place. I hope that you can all look beyond my heritage and so that we can all get along with one another, or at the very least act civil toward one another. I know that some of you are uncertain about me being here, but know that I'm here for only one reason. And if you can't trust that, then at least trust in the fact that the principal agreed to me being here. Just as he finished saying that, a small red blur came out the open door and jumped on top of Naruto and landed on his shoulders. It was a small crimson fox that only he knew was actually Amami, the Kyuubi no Kitsune. It only took a couple seconds for the girls in the class to fall in love with the cute little kitsune. Oh, this is cute, Naruto said, introducing Amami by the alias they agreed on, as the small fox yipped in reply. Mr. Uzumaki, the teacher began sternly. We do not allow pets in the school. Well, for starters, she's not really my pet. Naruto began, getting a yip of agreement from Amami, while mentally she was cursing out the teacher with every word in the book. How dare he call a being of her status a simple pet? Secondly, it really wasn't my choice about her being here. She won't listen to a thing I say. Another yip. If you really have a problem with it, please feel free to do something about it. The teacher seemed to take some offense to what Naruto said, as he marched up angrily to the blonde and reached out to take the small kitsune, only to retract his hand in fear when Amami suddenly snapped her jaw at his outstretched hand and bared her very sharp teeth to him. The teacher couldn't really explain it, but suddenly he felt this feeling of dread wash over him, like if he did anything he just might die, not knowing that Amami was releasing a minuscule amount of ki. Sweating lightly, the teacher took a cautious step back. No, it's fine, she can stay, he decided nervously, getting curious looks from his students. That's good, Naruto said cheerfully, as he pulled out a piece of paper from inside his blazer. Principal also gave me this paper, giving me permission to have Amami here with me. Naruto explained, handing the piece of paper to the teacher, who gingerly took the piece of paper from the blonde student, keeping his eyes on Amami all the time in case the small demon tried to bite his hand off. Snatching it from Naruto's outstretched hand, he quickly began to read it, as Naruto continued. It also states that I'm allowed to have my uniform like this along with the small modifications that I made. Reading through the piece of paper, the teacher found that everything that Naruto said was true. So handing Naruto back his paper, the teacher coughed into his hand in an effort to save face in front of his students. Very well, everything seems to check out. Mr. Uzumaki, if you would please take the seat next to Ms. Statfeld, we can begin with today's lesson, the teacher said, walking back to his desk. Colin blinked in surprise at the fact that Naruto would be sitting next to her, before she looked to her left and saw that there was in fact an empty seat right next to hers. That's weird, she thought, so all this time there were 2 empty seats right next to each other in the middle of the class. She wondered silently to herself. Naruto just grinned at the man's retreating back before shifting his gaze to the other students, noticing that the only seat that was free was next to the red-haired girl. Walking up towards her, Naruto gave the girl a smile, and introduced himself to her. "Hi, I'm Naruto Uzumaki," he said pleasantly. Colin stared at the boy for a second, before she nodded her head and spoke as calmly as possible, not letting any of the apprehension and curiosity she felt towards him to be seen. "Colin Statfeld," she answered evenly. The 2 teens stared at each other for a moment before Naruto asked her something that he really wanted to know. This might seem a little strange. But does the name Naoto mean anything to you?" he questioned. Colin's eyes widened, surprised to hear her brother's name come from the blonde's mouth. "How do you know that name?" she asked him instead, her voice just a bit guarded. "I met Naoto a few years ago," Naruto answered. "He told me he had a sister my age and you sort of look a little like him." Colin nodded her head in acceptance before one of the girls that were surrounding her before spoke up. "You have a brother Colin." "I didn't know that. He passed away a few years ago. It is not something I like to talk about," Colin replied softly, her attention still on the cerulean-eyed boy, who she noticed was looking at her strangely. "What?" she asked him apprehensively, still not completely sure she could trust Naruto not to be a problem for her. Naruto shook his head. "Nothing, it's just your eyes seem strange." "Huh, Mr. Uzumaki," the teacher cut in, "if you would please take your seat, so we can start class." He finished, some of the distaste he felt for the half-Britannian boy seeping into his voice. Naruto threw the teacher a grin over his shoulder. "Sure, sorry," he said, taking his seat beside Colin. The red-haired pilot wanted to ask again what he meant by his comment, but the teacher called for everyone's attention and class began. Later that day, Naruto was walking aimlessly through the halls of Ashford Academy, with Amami lying comfortably across his shoulders. It was lunchtime and he was just spending the time between classes looking around his new school since he had already eaten his lunch. While nobody else could tell by how he was acting, Naruto was actually having a mental conversation with Amami through the mental link that they had established. "Is it really a good idea to stay here?" Amami questioned her former container. "What's that? You're the one who insisted that I come to this place," Naruto pointed out briefly, glancing down at the fox on his shoulder. "That was before I knew that there was someone here that had seen you in your disguise," Amami told him. "If that girl, Colin Statfeld, figures out you were the guy in the fox mask yesterday, it could spell serious trouble for us." The Kyuubi finished. "Is that what you're so worried about?" Naruto thought amusedly. "This is no laughing matter, Naruto." Amami thought back at him irritably. "We have to think of something before she figures it out." "Relax," Naruto told her pacifyingly. "Don't you remember? That's why I had you place the genjutsu on the mask. The jutsu will keep anyone from being able to make the connection between me and my secret identity. They could have a picture of me within it had my mask on right next to each other and not be able to see a resemblance between the two of us. I also used the Sharingan to reinforce the genjutsu you placed on it, so it will practically take me taking my mask on and off and telling people who I am before they can make the connection." Naruto thought, "Besides that, the only thing that could give me away is my hair, and do you know how many Britannians have blonde hair?" "Fine," Amami thought acceptingly before staring at her partner curiously, "but I wonder why you're trying to convince me to let you stay when earlier today you would Avenue used this excuse to get you out of school," she said suspiciously. "What's changed, I wonder?" Naruto chuckled nervously. "I have no idea what you're talking about," he answered just as they walked into the courtyard where a bunch of other students were enjoying their lunch break talking with friends. Amami was just about to say something when they both suddenly felt a spike of energy coming from somewhere nearby. Neither Shinobi nor Biju recognized what type of energy it was, seeing as it was neither chakra nor yuki, but they could tell that it wasn't something natural and strong enough for them to take note of. Looking toward where the energy spike came from, they saw Lelouch and Colin talking to one another away from everyone else in the courtyard. What was that? What are they doing? Naruto thought to his former prisoner. I don't know, Amami admitted honestly, Something she didn't like to do because after living for as long as she has, she did not enjoy the idea that there were things that she still didn't know. We should investigate, Naruto stated, to see if we can figure out what the source of that energy spike was. He declared, "Yes, I'm sure that's the only reason you want to go over there." Amami thought privately to herself before answering her partner, and how exactly are we supposed to do that? Naruto chuckled lightly to himself before picking up Amami up off his shoulders and holding her out so she was facing him. "Easy my dear Amami, we use our secret weapon," the blonde shinobi told her with a mischievous smile on his face. Colin stared at the dark-haired boy in front of her fiercely. Well, as fiercely as she could without revealing that she wasn't actually frail-bodied, the violet-eyed boy had suddenly come up to her and told her not to mention Shinjuku. She was about to demand to know what he was talking about when a sound below her drew the red-haired girls, and Lelouch's, attention. Looking below them, they saw the red-furred fox, the one that had arrived with Naruto earlier. At Colin's feet, looking up at the girl with its head tilted to the side. Colin couldn't help herself, as she bent down and picked up the adorable little kitsune. "Well, hey there, aren't you the cutest little thing? What are you doing here?" Colin asked Amami while petting the Kyuubi no kitsune on her head. While physically showing that she was enjoying being petted internally, Amami was seething at Naruto's idea. "Naruto, I swear you're going to pay for this. I am an almighty demon, the strongest of the Biju. How dare you use me like some cute cuddly pea you take to the park to pick up women. I promise Naruto, you will pay." She swore at him even though she knew that he couldn't hear her at the moment. Lelouch was silently thankful for the distraction that the small fox presented him with when he realized that his Gios was no longer working on Colin. He was contemplating what the possible reasons behind why his new power wasn't working on he girl in front of him when another voice broke him out of his thoughts. "Ah, that's where you went off to Q," Naruto said, walking up to the pair at a steady pace, an unassuming smile on his face. He focused his attention on Colin, while giving Lelouch a nod of acknowledgement. "Sorry about that, she just left for some reason," the blonde ex-Jinchuriki said, rubbing the back of his head sheepishly. "It's fine," Colin said, returning his smile with one of her own before looking down at the small vixen in her arms. "She is absolutely beautiful and her fur is so soft," Colin complimented, as he said that she could have sworn that the fox gave Naruto a smug look before it disappeared and the kitsune was snuggling herself into her arms. "You must take good care of her. How long have you had her?" she asked her blonde classmate. I've had Q with me for about 3 years now," Naruto answered thoughtfully, "though most of the time it feels like I've had her with me my whole life." Former Konoha shinobi added in at the end. Lelouch had been quiet while the other two teens had been talking, part of him thankful to the blonde for distracting the red-haired girl, the other part of him was angry about being ignored by the both of them. Quickly he tried to think of something that would ensure that all of Colin's attention was focused on him when he remembered something Naruto said from earlier. "Naruto," Lelouch spoke up, getting their attention momentarily. "Earlier in class you said you met someone named Naoto, who turned out to be Colin's brother. I'm curious, how did you meet him exactly?" Colin was startled slightly by Lelouch's voice. She would admit to herself that she had forgotten about the violet-eyed boy while talking with the boy whose heritage was like her own, but wasn't afraid to claim what he was or the consequences that followed. When she remembered that Lelouch was also there, she wanted to again demand to know what he meant when he mentioned Shinjuku. But the question about her brother made her instantly curious about what the answer was. "Ah, who are you?" Naruto asked with cocking his head to the side, acting like he didn't know what the boy's name was. "Oh, I'm sorry, my name is Lelouch, Lelouch Lamperouge. We are in the same class," Lelouch answered pleasantly with a smile on his face. Naruto could see that though Lelouch projected an aura of benevolence, he wasn't being sincere, and instead was only acting kind to him in order to achieve something. The dark-haired boy hid his true character well, definitely better than Colin, but the blonde shinobi wasn't so easily fooled. A result of growing up in a shinobi village filled with people who hated him, and would act nice towards him just so they could gain his trust and then stab him in the back. And being able to faintly sense the emotions of other people thanks to Amami. Still, for the meantime he had to play along. "It's nice to meet you, Lelouch," Naruto said, and to answer why our question, "I met Naoto 3 years ago. I was passed out, Out in the forest near the Shinjuku ghetto when Naoto found me and helped me regain consciousness. My mind was a bit hazy at the time, so he told me where I was and made sure I was alright. What were you doing out there that made you pass out? Colin asked Naruto questioningly. Sorry, but I rather not talk about that. Naruto replied, Saint, a bit of sadness seeping into his voice, as the memories of what led up to his arrival into this dimension resurfaced before he shook it off. There was no point on dwelling on the past, especially something that was 3 years old. Don't worry about it, the red-haired girl said, shaking her head slightly, but since you brought up Shinjuku, she continued, shifting her attention from Naruto to Lelouch, her eyes once more gaining a fierceness to them that Naruto immediately noticed. What was that earlier? Why did you mention Shinjuku? Lelouch silently cursed his new classmate inside his head. Instead of diverting the blue-eyed girl's attention to himself, Naruto just focused it back on him. Luckily he was saved from having to answer when a new voice cut into the three's conversation. Hey 11 trash, Uzumaki. The voice shouted, causing the three teens to turn toward where the voice originated from, only to see three boys standing together a short distance away from them. The boy in the middle stood slightly in front of the others, most likely the leader of the small group, with a sneer on his face while he stared at Naruto, completely ignoring the two other people who stood beside the blonde. Colin did her best not to glare at the three of them. She had been expecting this kind of reaction the moment that Naruto had announced his status, but that didn't make it any easier for her not to be angry at them. Shifting her gaze towards the blonde beside her, she was once more surprised by what she found. Instead of any sort of anger, worry, or fear, Naruto seemed to almost be amused by the three academy students' hostility towards him. Just who is this guy? Colin thought in silent wonder. Do you guys need something? Naruto asked them, doing his best to keep his voice even and not show just how much he found all this funny. He knew that something like this would happen eventually, but he didn't expect it to happen the same day that he arrived at the school. Well, at least I can deal with this now instead of later, the sapphire-eyed boy thought. You can get out of our school, the leader of the group said condescendingly. And if I refuse? Naruto shot back almost challengingly, a smirk on his face. Well then, the leader said, his two goons stepping forward, cracking their knuckles. We will, just to make sure you don't refuse, won't we? He asked threateningly. Lelouch was about to step forward to remind the three unruly students that he was there and try to keep this from escalating further, but before he could, Naruto held up his arm and kept him from doing so. The dark-haired boy looked at Naruto questioningly while the whisker-marked boy subtly shook his head. I'll handle this, Naruto told him. Are you sure? Colin asked anxiously. He wasn't really planning on taking these guys on by himself, was he? 3-on-1 was more than the average person could handle. Too bad Colin didn't know that Naruto was far from being average. It'll be fine, the former Konoha shinobi replied calmingly with his hands in his pockets, as he stepped closer to the three students. Colin nodded her head somewhat reluctantly, holding Q closer to her, which she just realized was still in her arms. The three teens charged at the blonde shinobi recklessly, their fists raised, without any real plan behind their attack. Naruto grinned as he almost effortlessly weaved through the boys' punches, not even bothering to take his hands out of his pockets. Naruto didn't even bother trying to fight back. These brats were completely untrained in the art of fighting. And were just throwing punches around wildly, so him actively trying to fight them would be overkill to the extreme, since he could have all three of them on the ground covered in bruises and bleeding slightly in less than a minute. Besides, the whole point of this was to draw a crowd, which they were slowly gathering. Ducking under another sloppy punch, Naruto moved a few steps away before turning around to stare at the rambunctious trio, all of who were breathing quite heavily. Are you guys done? Naruto asked them. Shut up, the leader gasped, wiping away a bead of sweat from his brow. You Vent even tried to fight back, you damn coward. True, Naruto conceded, uncaring about the fact that the teen had just called him a coward, but seeing the condition that you are all in, that hardly matters. He continued. Now tell me, do you know what that building over there is? The cerulean-eyed former Jinchuriki asked, gesturing to a building off to their right. That's the administrative building, one of the other boys answered automatically. Correct, Naruto said, but more importantly, it is where the principal's office is located, an office which is facing in this direction. Naruto pointed out before continuing. Now from where you three are standing the principal can't see you, but if you continue your little attack then you would be forced to come to me and then you would be in clear view. So what? The leader scoffed uncaringly, do you honestly think that the principal will take your side over ours half-breed? Hell, he will probably thank us for providing a service to T. He school by getting rid of some worthless trash. He stated almost proudly. Besides, do you have any idea of who I am? I am Alex Mercer, son of Daniel Mercer, one of the head developers of Namikaze Corp. The principal would be a fool to punish me, unless he wants to deal with the wrath of my father and the Namikaze Corporation. The teen boasted arrogantly, only to shiver slightly when he noticed the look on Naruto's face. The grin on Naruto's face could almost be called feral now, as he stared down the boy across from him. Namikaze Corp, huh? If you three would excuse me for a second, Naruto said, pulling out his phone from his pocket, started looking through his contact list, and called someone, confusing everyone watching. Hello, Mr. Mercer. Naruto began the name of the person he was talking to, quickly drawing everyone's attention. How are you today? That's good to hear. I called you to inform you of a couple of things. No, nothing like that. It's just that today I started at an Ashford Academy and you would not believe who I have right here in front of me, your son Alex. In fact, why don't I let you talk to him? The shinobi finished tossing his phone to the befuddled Alex, who juggled the phone for a second before holding it up to his ear. Alex didn't know what the bastard half-11 was trying to do by acting like he was talking with his father, but it didn't really matter in the end, he figured. Hello? Alex asked tentatively. Alexander. The voice of Daniel Mercer came through the other end. Father. A shocked Alex said, his eyes wide in surprise. Listen to me, Alexander, drive. Mercer implored his son, please don't do or say anything that will anger Mr. Uzumaki. You don't have the slightest of ideas of who he is, and if you anger him it could easily cost me my job. But Fath. No buts, Alexander, this is very serious. Daniel Mercer said, cutting his son off. Refrain from expressing your self-appointed opinions or our entire family will end up suffering the consequences of your foolish and rash action, Mr. Mercer ordered his son. Keep out of trouble and try to be civil. Understood, father, Alex said a bit bitterly, as he tossed the phone back to Naruto uncaringly. Easily catching his phone, Naruto held it up to his ear. Don't worry, drive. Mercer, your son has been behaving perfectly. Yes, it was nice talking to you as well. I'll let you return to your work now, he said before hanging up the phone and putting it back in his pocket. Everyone in the courtyard was quiet, as they tried to get their minds around what just happened and not being able to understanding a bit of it. Who the hell are you? Alex all but demanded, glaring at the blonde across from him. I suppose a more proper introduction is in order. Very well then. Naruto mused before coming to a decision. My full name is Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, owner of the Namikaze Corporation, and lead singer of the band Spiraling Leaf. The blonde student said with a smile, it is nice to meet you, Alex Mercer. Son of Daniel Mercer, a head developer of Namikaze Corp. The subtle threat behind his words wasn't missed by those watching. Why, you're TT, the owner of Namikaze Corp. Alex stuttered in shocked disbelief. Yes. Naruto answered simply. Right after Naruto answered, the whispers began again, as everyone discussed what they knew about the Namikaze Corp, and all it had accomplished in the last few years since its formation, along with a few mentioning that they had relatives that worked there. Well, the male students talked about the company anyway. The female members of the student body had focused on his second declaration. The identity of the members of the famous band was something that they had all wondered about, and now they had the handsome lead singer of the band as their classmate. None of them cared about the fact that he was half 11, since that hardly mattered now that they knew this very important piece of information. Naruto shivered at the looks that a lot of the female student body was giving him, and Kami helped him, even some of the boys, and could already see the beginning formations of a fan club. His identity as the owner of Namikaze Corp. And lead singer of Spiraling Leaf weren't all that well known by the public. In fact, Naruto went out of his way to make sure that as few people as possible knew what he looked like, but he also knew that eventually that it would have to become public knowledge. That's why he wanted to tell everyone on his terms. He had planned it all out from the moment he told everyone that he was half Japanese. And half Britannian, he had known that some idiot would try to start a fight with him, so he decided to reveal his identity whenever the first idiot wanted to start something. The fact that young Alex was the son of one of his workers was mere coincidence. Of course he hadn't considered the possibility of fangirls when he came up with his plan, and now he just might pay for it. Colin stared at the blonde in no small amounts of amazement. She of course knew about the Namikaze Corporation, and even she would, secretly, admit to being a fan of Spiraling Leaf's music. It was thanks to that company that the resistance had sufficient medical supplies on hand. It was also thanks to them that the Japanese people lived in better conditions than they would have without. To have the boy, no man who made all that possible right in front of her was nothing short of amazing. He had done so much in a few years, arguably maybe even more than anyone in the resistance, and yet he was the same age as her. Lelouch was also looking at the blonde student, but his stare was more calculative rather than amazement. Like everyone else there, he had also heard of the Namikaze Corporation. He also knew that what the company was doing, hiring and selling to Japanese people without any sort of discrimination, was not something that a lot of Britannian nobles agreed with, but they had been unable to do anything to sabotage the company. If the whiskered marked teen in front of him really was the owner of famous company, then that meant when the time came Lelouch could possibly have one more person to help support him in his goal of destroying Britannia. He guessed that his new classmate was important after all. Sorry for the trouble, Alex finally said grudgingly. We'll be going now. He finished ironing for his two underlings to follow him. With the entertainment over, most of the students went back to whatever they were doing before. Naruto made his way back toward where the red-haired girl and black-haired boy was standing, his carefree smile still in place as he approached them. So, Naruto began, "Are you really the head of Namikaze Corp?" Colin couldn't help but ask, still a bit shocked by the information. "Yes," Naruto answered with a chuckle. "Is it really that impossible to believe?" he asked them. "Yeah," Lelouch said. "Just a bit," Colin admitted. "Well, believe it," Naruto replied, laughing lightly at his private joke, while Amami subtly rolled her eyes. "It's not something that I like to advertise, as it will just bring me unwanted attention, but it had to eventually come out, and this seemed like as good as time as any, so I figured why not." The sapphire-eyed boy finished shrugging his shoulders. Before they could say anything more, a new voice cut into their conversation, this time a female voice. "Hey you guys. You know it's time to head over to the chem lab, you better get a move on." A girl with waist-length orange hair and yellow-green eyes named Shirley Finette shouted from a nearby window, as she waved her arm at the trio. At that moment Lelouch could have kissed Shirley. There wasn't a doubt in his mind that sooner or later Colin would have returned to questioning him about Shinjuku and his involvement with yesterday's events. Until he figured out what he could say, Lelouch had to buy as much time as possible, but what concerned him the most was why his gyos suddenly stopped working. "Oh crap, it's my turn to set up for class," Lelouch exclaimed before rushing off. "Was it just me?" Naruto started, as he and Colin watched Lelouch run off. "Or did he seem to overreact a bit?" he said out loud before turning to face Colin, who focused her attention on him now that they were mostly alone. "You know, it is nice to see that your eyes have changed from this morning. They seem far more real now, and they have this certain fire to them," the Kyuubi pilot commented. "What?" Colin asked, confused for the second time that day by the blonde's strange words. Before Naruto could say anything else, he suddenly felt a strange sense of dread come over him. When he looked around, he noticed that he was slowly being surrounded by a number of various girls, all of them having a weird look in their eyes. Naruto gasped nervously, as he spared Colin a glance. "I think I should get out of here now. I'll see you in class," he told her before he ran away. The horde of hormonal teenage girls chasing after him. "Hey, hold on a second," Colin called out after him, but the blonde shinobi had already disappeared from view. Looking down, Colin stared at the small fox that was in her arms. "Looks like he forgot about you," the ocean blue-eyed girl murmured to the crimson-furred vixen. "I guess I'll just have to return you during class Q," she said, petting the kitsune on top of her head before heading off toward her next class. In her mind, Amami was laughing her ass off at her former cantainer's misfortune. That night Naruto and Amami were back at their home in the Namikaze Corporation building, relaxing after the day's events. They had just settled down in the living room when Naruto began asking the questions that he had been wanting to ask since earlier that day. So do you know what that energy spike was? Or how Lelouch and Colin were involved? Naruto asked his former tenant. Do I know what that energy spike was? No, not really. Amami stated evenly. But I think that I have an idea of what exactly happened. What is it then? Naruto questioned curiously. While Colin held me, I could feel a residue of whatever that power was on her. From there I could trace it back to the black-haired boy, Lelouch. He seemed to be the source of the energy. While I don't know what the power is, the signature was similar to what you would expect from genjutsu. Amami said, pausing for a second before continuing. That probably means he was controlling her for something. Though we still don't know how the genjutsu he has works, or if I'm even right about any of this. So all this is a guess at best. Well, at least we know something. Naruto muttered. What are the chances of this genjutsu of Lelouch's working on us? I'm not sure. Amami admitted. Like I said, it was only similar to a genjutsu, so I don't know how it will affect us. Chances are that it won't work considering that you poses the Mangekyo Sharingan and you have me to help break any type of control he gets over you. But what about you? Naruto pushed, noting that she had left herself out of her explanation. Please, like a simple ninja could ever control the great Kyuubi no Kitsune. Amami said arrogantly, as she puffed out her chest. Naruto looked at the demoness amused, a look that Amami took quick note of, and knew why he was looking at her like that, just because it happened once. Naruto quickly held up 2 fingers. Fine. Just because it happened twice doesn't mean that it will happen again. The red-headed vixen said irritably, besides, if it ever does work, you will be able to tell through our mental link that something is wrong and use the Sharingan to stop me or override whatever he tried to get me to do. She finished. That's good. We don't know what Lelouch's motives are. How he got this power, or if we can trust him. We can't risk him controlling us and using Namikaze Corp's resources for his own objectives. Naruto finished seriously, with Amami agreeing with him. The next day things had settled down a bit since Naruto's announcement. There was a lot of talk amongst the students and faculty on whether the blonde's claims were true or not. But with the way that Alex reacted the other day, they were slowly coming to accept that one of the most successful businessmen in Area 11 was a 17-year-old, half Japanese half Britannian schoolboy. Most didn't know how they should react towards the news, knowing that someone they usually considered below full-blooded Britannians actually stood above them. But of course there were those who didn't care what Naruto had or what he had been able to accomplish. To them he was still some half-blood filth that needed to learn his place. They just couldn't go around threatening the sapphire-eyed boy like Alex had. Classes had yet to start for the day and Colin was on the roof of one of the buildings talking to someone on her phone. So, how is campus life treating you? Ogi's voice was heard asking from the receiver. Stifling, Colin answered discontentedly, I was stuck in history class yesterday. Look, maybe I should just head back. The army is on high alert, right? The black-haired Japanese man said. Stay there, let things cool down for now. He tried to reason with her. But what about the voice on the radio and the guy with the fox mask that helped Nagata? Colin asked him. How is Nagata, by the way? She added in at the end, concerned for her friend that had come so close to dying. He's recovering, Ogi said, letting out a sigh at the end, still thankful that his friend was alive. I don't know what it was that masked guy did, but Nagata's wounds are almost completely healed now. A few more days of bed rest and he should be as good as new. He told her before continuing. We can't go looking for a voice, and we haven't got a clue on how to find the guy with the fox mask. He paused for a second, as they stared at a photo behind him which showed Naoto, Colin, and him out by a river. Besides, Naoto would be happy to see you back at school. Forget about Shinjuku for now. The dark-haired man finished. Colin lowered her gaze at the mention of her brother before something else came to mind. Hey Ogi, she began. What is it? Ogi asked. Since you brought up Naoto, did he ever talk about a Naruto to you? The red-haired girl asked him. Naruto? He questioned her, confused. Yeah, spiky blonde hair, blue eyes, and 3 whisker marks on his cheeks. The dark blue-eyed pilot replied. Well, now that you mention it, Ogi started, as remembered his childhood friend telling him about a boy with that description a few years ago. Naoto did mention finding a kid your age that looked like that passed out near the camp we set up a few years ago. He said it happened the night before we found all those Britannian soldiers knocked out. Why? He asked curiously at the end. Because I just met him, Colin told him. He's going to school here. Oh, that's interesting, Ogi replied. But that's not the reason I brought him up, Colin said, making Ogi all the more curious. His full name is Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze. The black-haired Japanese eyes widened. Namikaze. As in the Namikaze Corporation? Ogi asked incredulously. Yeah, Colin answered simply. So you're going to school with the kid of the head of Namikaze Corporation? Ogi asked her again with a hint of disbelief in his voice. No, Colin stated calmly, I'm going to school with the head of Namikaze Corp. What? Ogi gasped in surprise, but that would mean that this guy's only 17 years old. That's what it seems like, she said, before telling Ogi everything that she learned about the whisker-marked blonde. Incredible, Ogi muttered, listen, I'll be in touch. He ended before hanging up. Colin pocketed her own phone, as she thought about everything that happened in the last few days. Remembering the incident at Shinjuku, she also recalled the Pers on who wore the fox mask and ended up saving her and her friends' lives. For some reason, the more she remembered what he looked like, the more she felt like she should know who was behind that mask. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't figure out who it was. Then there was that voice that she and the other resistance members heard over the radio. The last thing she recalled was what happened yesterday with Lelouch and how he never answered her question about Shinjuku. No, it couldn't have been his voice, Colin thought to herself, as noted how similar Lelouch's voice was to that the one giving her orders. For the rest of the day, Colin watched Lelouch suspiciously, trying to decide if her thoughts from earlier that day, if it was possible that Lelouch was the voice over the radio that she heard the other day. So far she wasn't sure, as the dark-haired teen hadn't done anything suspicious, and she couldn't remember the voice well enough to come to a decision. Naruto had noticed Colin's suspicious looks towards Lelouch and knew that it must be because of something that happened yesterday. Naruto wasn't the only one to notice. Lelouch had also seen the looks that Colin was rowing him and knew that he would have to do something about it soon. After classes ended for the day, Naruto had to quickly leave the room or be caught by the horde of fangirls that were after him. So he wasn't there to witness the interaction between Colin and Lelouch that happened after he left. Lelouch had asked Colin to accompany him to the student council's club room, where he assured her that they would be able to talk without being disturbed, only for each member of the student council to appear one right after the other. What is all of this? Lelouch asked. Lelouch, don't you know? A girl with shoulder-length blonde hair and dark blue eyes wearing an apron asked him back, as she pushed a cart full of food into the room. I thought that is why you brought her. We are inducting Colin into the student council. Well, her and one other person, we are just waiting for him to arrive, she said. Just as the girl finished saying that, the door to the club room was opened with Naruto rushing into the room with Amami on his shoulder, and quickly moved to the side, pushing themselves against the wall, both breathing heavily for some reason. When the doors slid closed, everyone in the room could hear what sounded like a stampede on the other side of the double doors. That was close. Naruto gasped between breaths. What was that? The blonde girl asked him. Fangirls, Naruto answered simply, as a shiver went down his spine at the mere mention of that word. Well, it's good to see you made it. We're just about to welcome you and Colin into the student council, she told him. Madam President. Lelouch voiced his confusion. It was my grandfather's idea, actually. She began, knowing what Lelouch was wondering about. The principal, Lelouch stated, more than asked. He thought it best that with Colin's poor health she would have a harder time with regular club activities. The council president said, setting the food out on one of the tables in the room. As for Naruto, with his popularity it would be difficult for him to join any regular club, she continued. Plus, thanks to him we were able to easily get the budget to balance. The blonde girl concluded cheerfully. What? No way, Rivals said, amazed. That thing was like impossible to figure out and would have taken us hours to get done. Naruto did it in 10 minutes. The female blonde stated almost proudly. Amazing, Shirley said, odd. Well, after having to deal with the financial transactions of the Namikaze Corporation all day, a simple budget wasn't that hard to do. Naruto said bashfully, as he then to stand closer to everyone now that things had quieted down and he couldn't hear any more fangirls outside. Then it's decided. The blonde council president declared, from today onward Naruto will help take care of the financial part of the student council. What, don't I get a say in this? Naruto asked bemused. No, the president immediately replied. This is a direct order from the student council president. Refusal will see you being penalized. She finished cheerily pointing a finger in his direction. Well, when you put it like that I guess I really don't have much of a choice, do I? Naruto questioned with an amused smile on his face. Thanks buddy. Rivals said coming up behind Naruto and patted him on the back. You have no idea the load you took off of us. Alright, blonde student council president began, we've put this off long enough already, it's time we introduce ourselves to our two new members. I'm Millie, and if you haven't figured it out by now, the student council president. The now named Millie finished. It's nice to meet you. Colin replied softly with a small bow. Next introduce himself was Rivals. Hi, I'm Rivals, the secretary. If there is anything you need help with, I'm your man. Hi, I'm Shirley and I'm a member of the swim club, welcome. Shirley said, introducing herself after Rivals. Finally, the last person to introduce themselves was a girl with black hair that was pulled into two pigtails that fell over her shoulders, wore round-rimmed glasses, the standard female academy uniform. Hi there, my name's Nina. She said shyly, as she threw fearful glances in Naruto's direction and took a slight step away from him. It's nice to meet all of you. Naruto told them with a large smile that actually caused the other girls to blush lightly. Shirley. The voice of a young girl began drawing Naruto and Colin's attention. When they looked in the direction that the voice came from, they saw a girl a few years younger than them in a wheelchair with her eyes closed. A gentle face, wearing a pink dress and a long white-sleeved shirt underneath, and had long light brown hair, carrying what looked like a few desserts in her lap, making her way over in their direction. Seeing the young girl in a wheelchair caused Colin to look sadly at her. I'm sorry, but could you set these on the table for me? She asked softly. Oh sure, thanks Nana, Shirley answered. As she quickly made her way over toward the younger girl. Nunally, what are you doing here? Lelouch asked, concerned for his sister. This is Lelouch's little sister. Millie informed the new members. I'm still in the middle school group, so I can't be on the student council yet. Nunally said to them. That's all right, you're an honorary member in our group. Rivals told her, with Nina agreeing with him. Well, if that's the case. Naruto began smiling softly at the fragile-looking girl. It's nice to meet you Nunally, I'm Naruto. He said, as Amami jumped off his should. Arin made her way over to Nunally before jumping onto her lap. And the small ball of fur in your lap is Q, a small fox that likes to follow me around. The blonde shinobi finished just as Amami nuzzled herself into Nunally. Naruto. Nunally began questioningly, Ms. Sayoko told me that Naruto is a type of Japanese food topping. She finished, tilting to her to the side, while she petted Amami's head. Everyone there, with the exception of Nunally, could see the twitch in Naruto's eye and how his smile became just little bit strained. Colin could also just barely keep herself from logging as she remembered one of the meanings for Naruto's name, and though he seemed annoyed it wasn't at Nunally. Well, she would be right. Naruto said in false cheerfulness, it's a ramen topping, why? By the way is the best food in the world, also called fish cake. But's that just one the meanings, the one I was named after is Maelstrom. Naruto stated stubbornly. Well, hello, it's a pleasure to meet you Naruto, Colin, and Q. Nunally said pleasantly, looking down at the fox in her lap at the end. Thank you, you as well, Colin replied just as nicely and with a smile on her face. Right, should we kick this off with a toast? Rivals said, placing a bottle of champagne on the table next to all the food. Champagne? Shirley asked, seeing the bottle that Rivals held. Yeah, but we are on the student council, we shouldn't. Nina said nervously, as Rivals began to open the bottle. Ah, come on, loosen up you guys. Rivals said, trying to uncork the bottle. No way, we're going to get in trouble. Shirley argued, trying to pry the bottle of champagne out of Rivals's hands. What followed was a short game of keep away, as Rivals did his best to keep the bottle out of Shirley's reach before he tossed it at Lelouch. Noticing who had the bottle now, Shirley pushed past Rivals and charged at Lelouch. Sadly, in her effort to get the bottle, she ended knocking herself and Lelouch over, which resulted in the cork blasting off the bottle in Colin's direction. Luckily, Naruto had been standing next to the short red-haired girl and had been able to knock the cork out of the air easily, while gently pushing Colin off to the side. "Now tell me that wasn't cool," Naruto said with a grin on his face until a spurt of wine, which came from the opened bottle, hit him on the top of his head before hitting the rest of his body, soaking him completely. "This is not so cool," Naruto muttered before lifting his head a bit and letting some of the champagne land in his mouth. "Good year though," he concluded. "I'm so sorry, Naruto," Shirley said, as she immediately started to apologize to the soaked blonde male. "Don't worry about it," Naruto said, waving off her apology. Colin stepped up from behind Naruto. "You didn't have to do that, you know," the red-headed girl told him. "Well, I wasn't about to let a pretty girl like you get hit by it," Naruto told her kindly, not noticing the light blush spread across her face because of his compliment. Being sheltered in her home or fighting out in a war didn't see her being complimented all that often, but it was something nice to hear every once in a while. Even if she wasn't all that concerned with physical appearance. Plus, she could tell the blonde meant it as a simple compliment and nothing more. Unlike some of the other Britannian students, Ho would do it either to get in good with the Statfeld family or on the off chance she would sleep with them, neither of which were an actual possibility. "Thank you," Colin murmured softly, unclear if it was for Naruto's compliment or for helping her. Naruto gave her one of his fox-like smiles before moving one of the wet locks of hair out of his face. "Now I need a place to get myself cleaned up," he said out loud. "You can use the bathroom we have here in the clubhouse," Millie offered. "And you can borrow some of my clothes while we wash yours," Lelouch added. "Thanks, but that won't be necessary," Naruto told him, as he pulled out his phone. "A perk of owning your own company is that you always have someone to help with these sorts of situations," the blonde shinobi said before making a call on his phone. Once he was done, he focused back on the group. "There, that's been taken care of. Now if you don't mind showing me where the bathroom is." "Sure, just follow me and I'll take you there," Lelouch told him, as he began making his way towards the bathroom with Naruto following silently behind him. 15 minutes later, Lelouch entered the club room with some clothes in his hands. Haven't just received them from the Namikaze Corp worker who delivered them. "Naruto's clothes are here," he told them, all of them having been curious about who had been at the clubhouse's front door. "Wow, that only took 15 minutes. Rivals said, looking down at his watch. "Do you think they do fast food delivery?" Lelouch smiled at this best friend. "Would be nice not having to wait all day," he said jokingly. "I should take these to Naruto now," Lelouch finished. "Hold on," Colin spoke up, drawing the dark-haired teen's attention to her. "Here, let me take Naruto's clothes to him. I feel like I'll owe him for keeping me from getting hit by the champagne," she finished, as she moved to stand next to Lelouch. "Sure thing," Lelouch said, giving her a friendly smile. "Let me just get something from my room real quick and I'll show you where the bathroom is," he told her, handing her the clothes and walking out of the room. Not too long later, Lelouch came back. "All right, let's go," he said. "That was fast. You went all the way to the boys' dorm?" Colin asked, trying to strike up a conversation as they walked down a hallway. "Actually, I live here," Lelouch replied. "It would be pretty hard for my sister to live off at the dorms. The principal of the school lets us stay here as a favor." "I see," Colin muttered just as they came up to a door. "Anyway, here we are," Lelouch stated, as he knocked on the door. On the other side of the door, Naruto was in the shower enjoying the warm water when he heard a knock on the door. "Who is it?" he called. "Naruto, it's Lelouch and Colin. We've brought you your clothes," Lelouch answered. "Okay, the curtain is drawn, so you can come on in," Naruto said, opening the door. Lelouch and Colin walked into the room, closing the door behind them. "You know, you didn't both need to bring me my clothes. I wanted to thank you again for what you did earlier," Colin said, her voice hitching a bit at the beginning. It was only until she saw the curtain she realized that blonde former Jinchuriki was naked on the other side. "There's no need to thank me, Colin. It wasn't that big of a deal and I was happy to help you," Naruto told her. "Still," Colin murmured. At that moment, the phone that was located in the bathroom started to ring. "I should get that," Lelouch said, moving to pick up the phone. If I don't, someone will come, is that okay? He asked at the end. Though he answered the phone without waiting for an answer. Isn't it a little strange to have a phone in a bathroom? Naruto asked no one in particular. Lelouch ignored the blonde's question as he answered. Hello, Ashford Academy's student council. Know this? Oh, it's for you. Lelouch said, as he handed the phone over to a confused-looking Colin. He says he knows you. The dark-haired teen added. Hello. Colin asked, taking the phone and holding it up to her ear. Glad you're still alive, Q1. A voice said over the phone. Colin let out a silent gasp as she turned herself ar. Ounce as she was facing Lelouch only to find him staring off into space. Was I wrong? Colin wondered to herself, as she stared at the black-haired boy. For his part, Lelouch was doing the best he knew. LD to keep his face impassive and not let a smirk spread across it, while the situation isn't as ideal as I would like. Lelouch thought, throwing a quick glance at the hidden blonde, this is the bees. Opportunity I have available to trick Colin into not being suspicious of me. 1600 hours the day after tomorrow. The voice began again, the observation deck at Tokyo Tower. Come alone. The voice instructed. Who are you? Colin demanded into the receiver. How did you arrange that ceasefire order? Hey, don't hang up. Did you say, ceasefire? Seems like you keep dangerous company, Lelouch remarked evenly. Oh, that was, Colin stammered, as she tried to think of something to say. Let me guess. Lelouch cut in, you're talking about a game, something online. He said in a friendlier tone of voice. Yeah, you got me. Colin said, going along with Lelouch's excuse. Well, there is nothing wrong with that. Naruto said, but what I'm interested in is how this guy knew to call here. Because either this guy is psychic or you have a stalker, Colin. The blonde former Jinchuriki finished opening the curtains, having gotten a towel and wrapped it around his waist earlier while Lelouch and Colin were talking. Colin turned her head to face Naruto when she froze in place. She watched transfixed, as Naruto's dripping wet hair framed his face perfectly, how the water cascaded down his chest toward his chiseled abs. And stopped at his waist. When Colin first saw Naruto, her face instantly became the same shade of red as her hair, but his eyes traveled lower and she took in his full appearance. Her face steadily grew a darker shade of red until it was too much, and Colin fainted due to the sensory overload. As she was falling, Naruto managed to grab a hold of her before she hit the ground. Do you think it was a good idea come out of the shower while we were still here? Lelouch asked. I figured you two wouldn't mind considering you were having an entire conversation while I was trying to get clean. Naruto told him. Now if you don't mind taking her so I can get dressed. The cerulean-eyed shinobi said. Oh sure, the violet-eyed boy said, moving to take the passed-out girl into his arms. When he did, Naruto noticed that the dark-haired student was struggling a bit to keep Colin up. Naruto let out an amused chuckle. You're not all that strong, are you? Naruto asked him amusedly. No, I'm more of the thinking type than being physically strong. Lelouch answered, as he slowly made his way toward the door. If you say so, Naruto replied offhandedly just as the door closed behind Lelouch. A couple of minutes later, Naruto emerged from the bathroom wearing his new clothes, which consisted of a dark red t-shirt, black cargo pants and tennis shoes, a belt that hung loosely around his waist with a silver fox head belt buckle, white jacket and orange spiral-like flames on his shoulders, and lastly was the necklace he won from Tsunade. Alright, what do you say we rejoin the others now? Naruto asked, taking Colin from Lelouch and holding her in a bridal carry. Sure, Lelouch said, thankful to be free of the extra weight he had been carrying. Returning to the club room, Lelouch began telling Naruto a few of the things that they had to do as members of the student council. The council doesn't require much work, I guess. Beyond occasional paperwork, we'll sometimes plan school events. Like the cultural festival. Naruto asked, shifting Colin in his arms slightly to make sure she was comfortable. Yup, like that. Along with the cross-dressers ball, the absolute silence party. And swimsuit day, Lelouch said with a straight face. Really? Naruto asked with a chuckle, causing Colin to grumble slightly, as she unconsciously snuggled herself closer into him. That sounds like some fun. He commented with his fox-like grin on his face. Well, you can always trust our president to keep things entertaining. Lelouch said cheerfully and with a fond smile on his face. You'll be spending a lot of time with her, so I hope you're ready. He finished. Hey, I noticed something, all your clothes are brand new, why is that? He questioned his blonde classmate. Oh that. Naruto began. I have a security set in at my home to keep people out, and currently I'm the only who can get in or allow others in. It was easier to just have some new clothes bought. Whisker-marked blonde concluded, just as they were walking back into the club room where everyone was waiting. Oh my, what happened? Shirley asked, rushing over towards them and checking over the unconscious redhead. Nothing to worry about, the blonde shinobi started, she just fainted, she should wake up soon. He finished, as if roused by his words. Colin began to shift in his arms and Gr. Ogili opened her eyes, a bit confused as to what happened. Ah, I see that Sleeping Beauty is awake. Naruto commented with a teasing edge to his voice. Colin's eyes widened in surprise once she realized where she was and more importantly whose arms she was in. Before she could say anything, Shirley once more voiced her concern. Colin, are you alright? She asked the red-headed girl worriedly. I'm fine, Colin told the swim club member, as Naruto put her down so she could stand on her own 2 feet. What happened? The orange-haired girl continued to ask. Nothing. I just fainted, nothing to worry about. The half-Japanese pilot said, blushing slightly, remembering what exactly caused her fainting spell, as she took a discreet glance back at Naruto and her mind flashed the image that caused her to pass out for just a second. Suddenly Nunaly's voice cut into their conversation, as she called out to her brother, Lelouch, it's awful. What is? Lelouch asked her, looking her direct. Ion Lelouch noticed that Nunally along with Millie, Rivals, and Nina were watching some sort of news broadcast on the television. Prince Clovis has been found dead. Millie answered, turning around to face them. They're saying he was killed. Rivals added. Naruto was surprised by the news, hearing that someone had actually managed to kill the third prince of Britannia despite all the protection detail that had to surround him specifically to prevent this sort of thing from happening. No normal person should have been able to accomplish such a task without being seen at some point and be immediately captured as they were trying to escape, which means it had to be done by someone with training in assassination, or an ability that gave them an advantage. Naruto rationalized, and he knew that. At that moment there was only one person that he knew of with an ability like that. Now the question is what reasons Lelouch has to kill a royal. Naruto mused to himself, as he threw a glance at the black-haired boy out of the corner of his eye. Prince Clovis has been taken from us. Jeremiah Gottwald said over the television broadcast for everyone to hear. Behind him several Britannian soldiers stood at attention. He fought for peace and justice against all of the 11s. He died a martyr. We must all bury our sorrow and carry on his will. The man with turquoise-colored hair finished passionately. Finishing his speech, the broadcast was cut off to show different footage. This showed a boy of 17 with brown hair being led by a bunch of soldiers that had their faces completely covered. The boy was trying to say something, but was punched by one of the soldiers for his efforts. We interrupt this broadcast with breaking news. The female announcer with blonde hair said, the man suspected as the murder has been captured. According to this report, the suspect is an honorary Britannian, Private Suzaku Kururugi, a former 11 and an honorary Britannian. I repeat, Suzaku Kururugi arrested for murder. Damn it, Naruto said out loud, getting everyone to look at him, surprised by his sudden exclamation, as he pulled out his phone and started to send messages to various people in his employment. This is a serious problem. He muttered, still looking down at his phone. Is there a problem, Naruto? Millie asked her fellow blonde somewhat uneasily. A project of mine is in danger of being stopped before I can even officially start it. Naruto replied without thinking about it. Project? Rivals asked curiously. The reconstruction of Shinjuku. Naruto answered, shocking everyone into silence. What? Colin stammered, surprised. You're going to rebuild Shinjuku? She asked disbelievingly, yet hopefully at the same time. That was my intention, Naruto said, putting phone on and refocusing his attention back on the other members of the student council. I started the idea last night, but if those people are now in charge of the government, then it will be much harder for me to do that. What do you mean? Shirley asked curiously. Those people were a group that likes to call themselves purebloods. Naruto began. You can tell by the red feather they wear on the left side. I've heard about them. Lelouch spoke up, They are of the belief that only pure-blooded Britannians should be part of the military. Their view is that a pure-blooded Britannian is incapable of being a criminal. Also, by removing all non-pure-blooded Britannians from military service, they can remove the concept of granting 11s the status of honorary Britannians. Lelouch explained before getting a confused look on his face. But I don't see how any of that would affect your reconstruction project. The violet-eyed teen pointed out. Everything you said is true, Lelouch. Naruto stated passively. There is just one thing that you don't seem to know about. Due to Namikaze Corp's success in the economy, the purebloods have seen it as sort of an insult to them personally. Now you have. Ain't heard of this because the purebloods have decided to focus on their goals and just let the Britannians that have to deal with my company personally, and a few Britannians of minor nobility, deal with it, but they have made sure that I know what their opinions are a couple of times in the past. I don't understand, Shirley said. Why would they be so opposed against the Namikaze Corporation? Some of their products are the best in the entire world and advances all fields of study are possible because them. The orange-haired girl pointed out almost fiercely. Naruto let out a light laugh before focusing his attention on solely her. I appreciate your high opinion of my company, Shirley. The sapphire-eyed teen told her honestly, and the answer is really quite simple. It's because I, a lowly half-breed, am the one who owns such a great company. They see it as another insult that anyone that is not pure Britannian could achieve what I have, the Konoha shinobi stated mirthlessly. So now that they have a seat of power, they will most likely try to put me in my place. But that doesn't seem fair. The girl with yellow-green eyes said remorsefully. Few things in life are fair. Naruto replied. All you would have to do is go to the ghetto and you could see that. We couldn't do that. Nina spoke up immediately. The ghetto is a dangerous place. There are a lot of 11s in that area. Naruto shifted his attention to the glasses-wearing girl, and absently noticed how she flinched on the slightest bit and took half a step back when he looked at her. Are you afraid of 11s? He asked her bluntly. The black-haired girl's eyes widened, as her pupils began to shake at having her phobia addressed straightforwardly without any hesitance on her blonde classmate's part. She stammered, unable to say anything constructive. You know, Naruto began slowly, moving closer to the dark-haired girl, I am half Japanese. Does that mean that you're only afraid of half of me? What half would that be? The top half or the bottom? Left or right? Front or back? Or do you prefer the top left half and bottom right? The whisker-marked shinobi continued to ask her almost jokingly. Well, Nina spluttered, trying to come up with a thing to say. If I offer my right hand, would you shake it or scream in terror? Naruto continued lightheartedly. Truthfully, I think your fear is senseless. Most Britannians live their entire lives inside the settlement without taking so much as a step into what once was Japan, and instead rely on the media to them how terrible 11s are. While it is true that some Japanese people are dangerous, the same could be said for Britannians. After all, not all Britannians are upstanding citizens of society, am I right? He finished in more serious tone. I suppose so. Nina answered unsurely. Naruto gave the girl a gentle smile before closing his eyes. Nina Einstein, Naruto began getting her full attention. A student of Ashford Academy and member of the student council. Currently in her 3rd year of school. She is marked as having excellent grades and is at the top of her class academically. Her teachers report that she has a brilliant mind for technological advancements. He finished saying, opening his eyes. Naruto noticed that everyone was looking at him in various degrees of astonishment, but again he focused solely on Nina. The Namikaze Corporation has had their eyes on you for a while now and was interested in offering you a job with us sometime in the future. Naruto told her. Really? The glasses-wearing girl asked him, astonished. That's great news, Nina, Shirley said happily. Yeah, congratulations. Rivals added. Hey, hold on a sec. Lelouch said, cutting of his friends from congratulating their friend, before turning his attention to Naruto. You said, was interested. The black-haired boy asked him with a raised eyebrow, emphasizing the use of past tense. All those in the club room took a moment to think over the blonde shinobi's words and realized that Lelouch was right. Turning their attention back to Naruto, they waited for an explanation. That's right, Naruto said, nodding his head in confirmation. With Nina being afraid of 11s, there is no possible way for her to be able to work at Namikaze Corporation. The cerulean-eyed blonde began, when I first established the Namikaze Corporation. I made sure that all my workers understood that they would be working besides both Britannian and Japanese, and treated equally. That means that for Nina to be able to have a job at Namikaze Corp, she would be comfortable working with the Japanese people, and I can't have her just working with Britannians because that would show favoritism. He explained. As looked around he noticed that they all understood what he was saying. But he also saw the look of sadness that Nina was expressing at the fact she had inadvertently cost herself the chance at working at such a prosperous company. That being said, Naruto continued, there is still a chance for you to work at Namikaze Corp. All you have to do is work past your fears, Nina. He finished, giving the black-haired girl a small kind smile. Nina nodded her head, as she tried to return Naruto's smile with one of her own, but she was still feeling a bit uneasy in the presence of the blonde. I'll have to go now. Naruto told everyone, are some things that I'll need to take care of personally. He finished, getting Q to leave her perch on Nunaly's lap and jump onto his shoulder. With a few goodbyes Naruto exited the club room. The next day the most noteworthy thing that happened was when all the students were called into the auditorium for a memorial ceremony in honor of the third prince. After the memorial ceremony Naruto didn't stay long, with all classes cancelled for the day. Instead he returned back to the Namikaze Corporation and continued working on his planned reconstruction of Shinjuku. So far the purebloods hadn't been able to gain enough of a foothold in the government to stop him, but unless something happened they would soon have enough power backing them up to impede everything that Naruto was trying to accomplish. Something else that he had to think about was procession of Suzaku Kururugi. He recognized the brown-haired boy as the one who had been with Lelouch when they were underground. Naruto didn't know all of the facts, but from the way that Suzaku had acted the other day he doubted that it was him who killed Clovis, and was instead being used by Jeremiah as a scapegoat in order to further his own objectives. It made sense in a way. If Jeremiah showed an honorary Britannian as the one responsible for Clovis' death, then it would discourage the idea of granting any other 11s the title of honorary Britannian. It looks like I will be making my second appearance tonight, Naruto thought to himself, an amused smile on his face. Should I have Kyuubi prepared for use? Amami asked, back in her human form, as she lay on the couch in Naruto's office reading a book, having listened in on Naruto's thoughts. I've decided at this point that whenever Amami is in her human form I'll just refer to her like this, and Q when she is in her fox form. No, Naruto answered out loud, as he stood up from his desk and made his way toward the elevator in his office. Because of the path the procession is taking, Kyuubi would be spotted before it even reached me and be attacked. I should probably create a seal that will allow for the storage or instant transportation of Kyuubi at some point. Naruto mused, thinking out loud at the end. But for now I'll go alone. He finished. Alright then, I'll be sure to keep my eyes on the news for you. Amami said, never once looking up from the book she was reading. Hours later Lelouch was waiting for big unveiling to all of Area 11, so far everything had gone exactly like he planned. He was just seconds away from the transport carrier that held Suzaku, which was being surrounded. A few Sutherlands while a number of Britannians watched the supposed murderer of Prince Clovis was taken by, all of being led by Margrave Jeremiah. He had been able to convince the terrorists, which included Colin, to follow him if he made the impossible happen, as a demonstration of his power. Of course there was still something that confused the former Britannian prince. It was something that Colin had said when they had met earlier. Flashback. Earlier that day, Lelouch was standing across from 4 members of the resistance, which had come like he knew they would, in a disguise that he had specially crafted for himself. Their close victory over Britannia in Shinjuku made the rebels desperate to believe that they actually stood a chance of winning if they followed his command. Of course they were skeptical that he could actually do anything, and that is why he promised to demonstrate what he is capable of, and at the same time he would be able to save Suzaku. Lelouch was eventually brought out of his thoughts by sound of Colin's voice. You won't show us your face then? At the least tell us if you have anything to do with the other guy. Colin demanded. What? Lelouch thought, surprised, but outwardly he kept a calm facade. I have no idea what you're talking about. Lelouch replied as calmly as possible. Don't mess with us. Colin shouted angrily. Do you honestly expect us to believe that the both of you showed up one right after the other, on the same day, and then expect that it was just a coincidence? The redhead continued. That guy with the fox mask is something that should be impossible, and you tell us with your power you're going to do the same thing. What the hell is she talking about? What guy? Lelouch nearly snarled mentally. As he was getting tired of the girl's accusations, it was obvious that something had happened yesterday that he wasn't aware of. I am being completely honest with you when I tell you that I have no knowledge of what you're talking about. As far as I knew, your group and I were the only ones fighting against the Britannians the other day, but now I look forward to meeting this person. Lelouch told them, his voice still even. End flashback. While it was true that Lelouch was curious about whom the other masked person was, he was also frustrated with the idea that there was someone going around that posed a potential problem to his plans for Britannia. He also wanted to know what the person with the fox mask did that was impossible, as Colin failed to clarify what exactly it was he did. Could he possess the same power as I do? Lelouch wondered, not liking the idea even more. He was going to have to either convince this guy to work for him or find some way to make sure he doesn't become a potential threat. That is going to have to wait for now, the black-haired student thought, as he felt the car come to a stop. You dare desecrate His Highness's transport? Jeremiah shouted, come out of there. He ordered from his perch on his Sutherland right in front of the carrier that Suzaku was being displayed on for everyone to see, with two more at the transport carrier's side and a final one coming up behind it. Across from his was an exact replica of Prince Clovis' car being driven by a disguised Colin. The Britannian flag, that was on the royal transport, ignited and turned to ash, revealing a masked individual waiting behind it. The figure wore a black cape that wrapped around his body that was outlined in gold, and the underside was red. He wore a mask on top of his head, which acted more like a helmet, keeping his entire head hidden from view. The faceplate was blank with what looked like a bird in flight on the bottom half of the mask. Under the cape, Lelouch wore a dark purple suit that also had gold accents, and a white ascot around his neck. I am Zero, Lelouch announced out loud for everyone to hear. Whispers instantly broke out, as everyone was trying to make sense of the night's sudden developments. Questions were being asked about the identity of the masked figure and whether he was a terrorist or not. The last thing anyone expected to hear, though, was clapping that could be heard by everyone in attendance. My, oh my, Naruto began already in his disguise, as he clapped his hands one final time. Standing on the transport carrier was Naruto with his back to Suzaku and the two Britannian soldiers that were guarding him. That was quite the entrance, Zero, he remarked amusedly. Everyone's attention was instantly switched from Zero to the figure that stood calmly in front of the supposed killer of Prince Clovis. The masses once again began whispering as they all wondered who the new person was and how he was there when no one saw him second ago. Halt! Don't move! Quote. The two Britannian soldiers that stood guard of Suzaku shouted, as they aimed their guns at Naruto's back. Not that the mask-wearing blonde seemed to care. Zero stared at the other mask-wearing individual and figured from the fox mask that the person was wearing that he was the one that Colin was talking about earlier, but before he could do anything to confirm his thoughts, Jeremiah spoke up. You! Jeremiah snarled, as he spun around to stare at the person behind him and pointed the gun in his hand straight at him. Before everyone's eyes, Naruto disappeared, only to reappear only a second later standing on the bridge in front of Jeremiah's nightmare with his back to him. Now there is no need for that, Naruto said in a tone an adult would use when speaking to an unruly child. Everyone had looks of shock on their faces as they watched fox mask-wearing teen literally disappear before reappearing a short distance away, like he teleported from one location to the other as if by magic. In another part of what once was Japan, the other members of the resistance group were watching the proceedings carefully, both in concern for their two friends and comrades that were there and to witness the power that Zero said he possessed. They watched in anticipation and worry as Zero revealed himself to the world, only to be shocked beyond anything they could have expected when they saw the mask-wearing blonde suddenly appear out of thin air. It's that guy again, Tamaki said, still a bit angry about that hothead comment the blonde made about him. You sound like you didn't expect him to be there, Tamaki. A voice from behind the gathered resistance members spoke up. Turning around, they saw Nagata standing behind him with his arm in a makeshift sling. Nagata, why are you up? You should be resting, a female resistance member with long dark blue hair said in concern. What, and miss this? Not a chance. Nagata replied with a small grin on his face. As he took a seat at the table the resistance members had in the room, and with that they all returned to watching the live broadcast. Colin smiled faintly once she laid eyes on the Tay-en that saved her a couple of times the last time they had met. Since this whole thing started she had been trembling slightly, afraid of being discovered by the military and shot down without any way that she could protect herself. But once she saw the mask-wearing blonde she felt herself become calmer, as a sense of safety washed over her. Thank goodness. Colin thought, grateful that there was someone there she knew could keep them safe if the need arose. Just what the hell are you? Jeremiah demanded. Naruto stared at the turquoise-haired man from over his shoulder, his eyes expressing how unconcerned he was with the few guns he had pointed at him. I was hoping to keep my identity quiet for a bit longer, but I guess I will have to do it now. Naruto said, shrugging his shoulders uncaringly. I am a shinobi. And you can call me Kurama. Naruto stated loud enough to make sure that everyone heard. Well then Kurama, I hope you are ready to die. Jeremiah said before pointing his gun to the sky and firing a single shot. That seemed to a signal because as soon as the bullet was fired another 4 Sutherlands were released from the planes that carried them, all 4 of them surrounding Naruto, their guns trained on his unmoving form. All units open fire now. The pureblood Britannian shouted. Watch out. Colin cried out in worry even though she knew it was pointless. Lelouch, hearing his red-headed classmate scream out in concern, just confirmed his thoughts that this guy was definitely the one she had mentioned earlier. In his mind Zero was silently cursing the blonde Becca. Use of how Kurama had unintentionally and unknowingly interfered with his plans to free Suzaku. He was also astonished with the speed that the blonde shinobi possessed, as it exceeded anything he had ever seen before. And if he was truthful with himself Lelouch would admit that he was sort of jealous of the cerulean teen's physical abilities. Before anyone could register what had happened Naruto was holding a kashini in his hands. As he started to deflect all the bullets that were fired at him, swinging his blade at nearly impossible speeds becoming almost a blur. I'll have to remember to thank Tsunade for telling me about Hinata's variation of the kaiden. Naruto thought as he channeled chakra into his arm and his mother's blade creating a thin line of chakra to extend from the blade. Ow. Though I don't possess Hinata's natural flexibility to perform her jutsu, by using a kashini as a medium I can work through that problem. The former Konoha shinobi thought to himself. When the Sutherlands eventually stopped firing Naruto broke the cycle he created with a final slash of his blade to the side, all the bullets that were fired at him falling down around him. It's best to compare it to what Ichigo does in Bankai in his fight against Byakuya. Impossible. Zero thought, his eyes widening beneath his mask. He defected. All of them. Colin mumbled, unknowingly finishing Zero's sentence. Everyone was once more staring at the blonde with wide eyes and their mouths hanging open, completely stupefied by what they had just witnessed. Turning around Naruto pointed his sword at the stunned Jeremiah. What is with that look? This will be the 3rd time I've said it in front of you, but you shouldn't underestimate what I can do. He told the stunned pureblood with a smirk on his face. Why you? Jeremiah growled, glaring at the smirking blonde heatedly. That was it. Zero couldn't wait anymore. He had to intervene and try to get his plan back on track. Lifting his hand up in the air he snapped his fingers, drawing everyone's attention back onto him, and causing the back of Clovis' car to fall open, revealing a dark red-colored canister, the same one the green-haired girl had come out of back in Shinjuku. What in the? Jeremiah muttered. Jeremiah, be careful, he's got the silver-haired woman named Valletta shouted out in warning. Yes, Jeremiah, Lelouch thought, a smile appearing on his face. You never saw inside this thing so you assume it hold poison gas. He paused, glancing down at Kurama who was staring at the canister. As for Kurama, you don't even have an idea of what this thing contains. But if the army is hesitant to do anything then you won't risk doing anything either. He finished almost smugly, believing that he had been able to outsmart someone he wasn't even prepared for. Of course he didn't know that Naruto was aware of his bluff and the fact that the canister didn't contain poison gas and was just letting this proceed for the fun of it. You bastard. The turquoise-haired Sutherland pilot said darkly. He's taken every Britannian here hostage, and he's done it without them even knowing it. He said more to himself than to anyone else. In an act of desperation Jeremiah pointed his gun at Zero, threatening to fire. The next few minutes were filled with tension, as the public tried to understand the importance of the canister. Jerry. Mia eventually realized that he couldn't risk firing at Zero without the masked figure detonating the canister, or accidentally missing and hitting the poison gas container itself. Finally the Pure Blue. D. Britannian asked for Zero's demands, which his reply was the release of Suzaku. When Jeremiah pointed out the fact that Kururugi was charged with killing the third prince of Britannia, Zero told him that was a lie. No, you are mistaken, Jeremiah, he's no murderer. Zero stated calmly. The man who killed Clovis was myself. He declared, announcing his deed to all of Area 11, the news shocking everyone and rendering them speechless for a moment, well, almost everyone. Ah, so you're the one responsible for Clovis' murder. Kurama said, a hint of amusement in his voice. Zero stiffened noticeable. Why, before spinning around to stare at where the voice came from, but still kept Jeremiah in his sights, his cape flaring up as he did so, only to find the blonde fox sitting comfortably on top of the canister. Tell me what you have achieved by killing Prince Clovis and then announcing it to the world. Wouldn't it have been better if the world didn't know of your existence, Zero? The fox mask-wearing blonde questioned his counterpart. I did it for justice. Zero retorted, justice against Clovis for all those he has wronged. For Suzaku Kururugi, who would be punished for a crime he did not commit, but no one would listen to. Making a grand gesture with his hands at the end before continuing, and you Kurama, will you join me and fight for justice against Britannia? The cape-wearing teen FFERED holding his hand out to the cloak-wearing one. Justice, Naruto mused. Justice is such a fickle thing, don't you think? You say you fight for justice, but only what you perceive justice to be. I've known men who have killed hundreds and rationalized their actions by saying that it was in the name of justice. The blonde shinobi finished. Then Kurama, why do you fight? Lelouch challenged. To protect, Kurama stated resolutely. I fight to protect that which I consider precious. So I will fight for this city, for this country, for my home and the people in it. It doesn't matter to me. If they are Japanese or Britannian, I will protect them to the best of my ability. He finished, standing on top of the canister, perfectly balanced, his cloak moving slightly in the low wind. Enough of this. Jeremiah shouted angrily, causing Zero to focus his entire attention on him. You two will pay the price for mocking the crown. The 4 nightmare frames that were surrounding Naruto before Vedsa, they now circled the replica of Clovis' car, their guns ready to fire at a moment's notice. We are so screwed. Colin muttered from her seat in the car, as she began to tremble again. Hey, Kay, Kurama said, appearing in the seat beside her. Don't worry about it, I promise to protect you should anything happen. He told her reassuringly. Colin stared at him for a second before nodding her head. Her trembling lessening until it stopped completely, the blonde's promise doing more to calm her than anything Zero said he could accomplish. Careful, you don't want the public to know about Orange, do you? Zero questioned. Okay, I officially hate this guy now. Naruto murmured quietly. When Colin looked at him questioningly, he explained. Orange is my favorite color and Zero just made it a bad thing. He muttered, crossing his arms under his chest while Colin shook her head in mild amusement. Tapping his foot on the roof of the car, Colin slowly drove the car further, as Lelouch continued his pre-planned speech. If I die, then it will all go public. If you don't want that to happen, you will do everything in your power to let us go, your prisoner as well. Lelouch ordered, activating his Gios. As a part of his mask slid back to reveal his left eye. Naruto felt a spike of energy the moment that Lelouch gave his order and recognized it as the same kind he felt the other day, giving upward to the idea that Zero was Lelouch. Focusing his sensing abilities, he tracked it coming from Zero and felt it influence Jeremiah. Sensing how the power was working, felt it was better to compare it to the Yamanaka clan's mind techniques. Whatever it was that Zero did, it seemed to working, as Naruto noticed that Jeremiah started ordering for Suzaku's release, much to the protest of the other purebloods. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed that one of the Sutherlands was getting ready to fire. Disappearing in a burst of speed, he reappeared, sword drawn, in front of the nightmare frame ITH-1/ he deflected the bullet that the nightmare had fired right back at it, destroying its hand. Charging at it at nearly impossible speeds, Naruto cut through its legs, making it crash down on the ground. The other 3 Sutherlands, seeing their comrade out of commission, opened fire on Kurama. Jumping into the air, the blonde shinobi evaded the barrage before falling down towards the nears T. Sutherland and sliced one of its arms off. Spinning himself around, Naruto slammed a Rasengan to one of the Nightmare's legs, completely destroying it, much to the shock of the crowd that could see what he did. A third Sutherland fired its slash Harkins at the former Jinchuriki, but Naruto sidestepped them both easily. Grabbing onto one of the slash Harkins, Naruto was pulled along with it once it was retracted. Sealing his mother's blade in a storage seal he had on his body specifically made for it, he formed a Rasengan in his now free hand. The Sutherland pilot, seeing Kurama approaching him, with the spiraling ball of destruction in his hand aimed directly for his Nightmare's torso. He had seen what that ball of light had done to the other Nightmare frame and wasn't willing to suffer he same fate as it by coming in personal contact with it. Decision made. The pilot hit the ejection button just as the Rasengan came in contact with the purple Nightmare's chest. The fourth Sutherland, seeing the last of its comrades, which fell with it from the planes that carried them when Jeremiah signaled, opened fire on the shinobi in an effort to avenge its fallen comrades. Only to watch as to NDED as the cerulean-eyed boy kicked off the remains of the Sutherland it was on and twist himself around midair, unsealing Akashini along the way, before channeling his wind chakra into the blade, extending the reach of the blade, and started to slice into the fourth Nightmare frame. When Naruto stopped cutting into the machine, all that remained of the Sutherland, that hadn't been turned into scrap metal, was the cockpit, with the pilot wetting himself inside out of fear. "Ladies and gentlemen," one of the TV announcers began, "if you are watching this, not only has the mysterious figure Zero, the apparent murderer of our dear Prince Clovis, negotiated the release of Suzaku Kururugi, but the other masked figure, Kurama, has decimated 4 military Nightmare frames in seconds. Just who are these people?" Landing back on the ground, Naruto turned his attention towards the others and noticed that Jeremiah had taken care of one of Sutherland's and was in the process of dealing with the other. The last Nightmare frame piloted Sutherland refused to move from where it stood after witnessing what happened to its comrades. "This way, hurry," Colin urged, rushing past him after Zero, who had Suzaku in hand. As they jumped off the bridge, Naruto looked around before shrugging his shoulders, figuring that he might as well, and followed after them. Later, the members of Resistance Group were inside an abandoned building discussing the night's events. Tamaki was still refusing to trust Zero, arguing that there was no way that what happened could ever work a second time. Got to give them some credit though. Ogi began, a far-off look in his eyes as he remembered everything that happened. Got to admit, nobody else could have pulled that off, not the Japanese Liberation Front and certainly not me. We always thought that a full-out war with Britannia wasn't a possibility at all, but maybe with him and Kurama it is. After all, it's not every day that a guy destroys 4 Sutherlands in less than 10 seconds. He finished. In another part of the abandoned building, Zero and Suzaku were talking to one another, as Zero tried to convince Suzaku to join him, while Naruto watched on silently, sitting down on a flat surface not too far away with one of his legs crossed. "This nation, it can be changed for the better, and from within," Suzaku declared, as he stared up at Zero. "And any ends aim through contemptible means aren't worth anything. You are quite the honorable person, aren't you, Suzaku Kururugi?" Kurama asked, drawing the messy brown-haired teen's attention. "You are willing to believe that Britannia, no matter how corrupt, can still be saved?" The mask-wearing blonde pointed out. "That's right," Suzaku replied evenly. "I have faith in the system, that change can be achy. Ved without the need to wage wars or having to kill anyone, so no more lives are lost. I might not be able to free Japan from Britannia rule, but I will make sure that its people are free." "How interesting," Kurama commented, as he picked himself up and brushing off some imaginary dirt. 3 different individuals that have similar goals to one another, but with different ways of trying to obtain that goal. Changing Japan from what it is right now. Seems that way, Suzaku stated as he began to walk away. "Wait, where are you going?" Zero demanded. "My court-martial begins in an hour." The brown-haired honorary Britannian replied. Zero clenched his fist angrily. "Are you mad? The only reason they are giving you a trial is to find you guilty, the judge, the prosecution, and defense." He shouted at Suzaku's retreating back. "Rules are rules," Suzaku said without turning back to face Zero. "And if I don't go, they'll start cracking down on 11s, and honorary Britannians." "But you'll die," Zero argued. I don't mind, the green-eyed boy said. Tell me Suzaku, what do you think would have happened if tonight's proceedings had gone like they were supposed to? Kurama asked him confusing Suzaku and stopping him in his tracks. What do you mean? Suzaku replied confused. If Zero had not interfered like he did, then Jeremiah would have most likely used the crimes against you to push forward his own ideas and make things worse for all the Japanese. Your death would have signaled the start of the end of any hope the Japanese had of obtaining any sort of freedom or peace, and all you sacrificed, all you wished to accomplish, would have been for nothing. The blonde explained. Suzaku looked down at the ground as he registered the sapphire-eyed teen's words before looking back at Zero. If that is the case, then I guess I should thank you for saving my life, so thank you. But that doesn't change my opinion or my decision. I'll go back and stand in court, and if I'm proven innocent, then I'll do whatever I can to make sure that Britannia does change from the inside. He declared determinedly, then continued his journey back to the settlement. Very well, but before you leave let me give you some advice. Those who break the rules are trash, but those who abandon their comrades are worse than trash. There might come a point someday when you will be forced to make a choice between the two of them. Naruto told him, getting a nod of acknowledgement from Suzaku, showing that he did listen to what Naruto said. Don't be an idiot. Zero shouted one last time at Suzaku. You know, an old friend of mine always used to tell me that. Suzaku said, not stopping. He said I was a fool. It's my weakness, I guess. He finished. With Suzaku gone and things settling down now that everything was over, Naruto decided it was the best time to leave. Lelouch barely registered Naruto's leaving, as he watched Suzaku walk back to the settlement, a scowl appearing on his face as he watched his friend walk away. Things hadn't gone exactly like he had expected tonight, not at all. That's it for today, I will stop here.